All right, recording in progress.
Okie
Welcome to
doke.
the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm Salvador Cordova, your host, and I am privileged to be joined by Marcia Montenegro, who is, I'll let her introduce herself. The last time that we had spoken was just before the COVID lockdowns at McLean Bible Church. And this is just a marvelous, this is just, first off, is just a marvelous testimony of someone that traveled a journey from darkness into light. And Marcia, why don't you, she's a full-time Christian missionary now, but if you would love to, if you'd like to share your story, where you came from, and I and the audience will just listen, whatever the Lord puts on your heart.
Okay, well, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, Salvador, and I appreciate seeing you again. I enjoyed speaking there at McLean Bible a few years ago, and now I notice everything is divided between before COVID and after COVID. You know, people will say, "Oh, I remember that. That was before COVID,"
Yeah.
and I do the same thing. You know, it's such a big marker in our times that we're living in. But I'm grateful my ministry has continued, and Christian Answers for the New Age, a ministry the Lord called me to, I've been doing full time since 1998. And the reason I deal with the New Age is because of my past in the New Age. And so I'm often asked, how did you get into it? Why did you get into it? How did you get out of it? Those questions. And that's what I think you want me to address today,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I will start going back to first. Let me just say that the way I got into the New Age was slowly. It was not, and I think this is true for most people. It's not an overnight thing, and you don't think to yourself, "I am getting into the New Age." In fact, that term, the New Age, wasn't even being used at the time I was initially getting involved in it. So I called it metaphysics. And I would say I'm interested in metaphysics because I'd heard a few other people use that term. And so that was kind of the term being used by a lot of people. But the way it started was an interest really back in high school and maybe even a bit earlier in other religions and in what I would call the powers of the mind, which we call psychic powers now, like being able to um, get information about another person without the usual methods, you know, just some kind of supernatural or power of the mind way. So like kind of like being a psychic. I was interested in those kind of things very much, and other religions. Now, I had been raised going to different churches because we moved around a lot, including we lived overseas. My father was a Foreign Service officer. So we lived overseas when I was young, and the churches were these kind of generic churches. I don't even really know what they were. I mean, I know one church was on an army base, and it was the generic Protestant service. I mean, they had Protestant, Catholic, Jewish. That was your choice. So you picked one of those three. And so I don't remember much about it. I remember singing, and that's all I remember. When we came back to this country, we lived near a Baptist church, and my mother had been raised Southern Baptist, and she thought children should go to church. And so my sister and I went to this nearby Southern Baptist church. And I went to Sunday school. I did all the Sunday school lessons. I went to youth group. I usually went to the Sunday night service. So I was a pretty faithful attender of church, but I was not a Christian because to me, the Bible was a book of stories. And we would learn about these stories in Sunday school, whether it was something from the Old Testament, like David and Goliath, or Noah and the flood, or something in the New Testament, like Jesus. Usually the stories were Jesus healing someone, things like that. So, I don't even my memory of it is kind of vague, but I know I went and I remember having the Sunday school book and doing the lessons. But to me, Jesus was sort of he was almost like a fairy tale figure. Like, I believed that he lived. I did believe he lived. I didn't think he was just mythology, but he just wasn't real to me. Well, I didn't understand who he really was. That's the problem. I just, I thought, well, he was a special teacher, kind of. He was very special. And I knew that, but I didn't get the whole thing. I didn't get the message of the cross. I didn't get the gospel. I'm not saying I didn't get it, that no one conveyed it. I just didn't get it. It didn't sink in. And so I just kind of viewed this as, you go to church because it's a good thing to do, and you want to be a good person, and you want to get to heaven. So you have to be a good person to get to heaven. And that was pretty much where my thinking was. And of course, because of that kind of thinking, I began to get restless and interested in other things, because just being good,
I'm
especially when you're a
sorry.
teen. Oh, that's okay. You got to stop it.
I forgot to shut off my phone. I can't believe I was my fault. Apologies to
That's
the
okay.
viewers. Apologies to
Yeah,
you.
I turned my phone off right before, because I sometimes forget to do that too. So, yeah. So, being good and trying to be good gets old after a while, especially when you're a teenager. And and I wasn't wild or rebellious or anything, but I felt like there had to be more to it. There has to be more to life than this just trying to be good, this good moral person. And I had friends who were other religions in high school, and these are wildly different religions. This is going to almost make you laugh, probably. But the four people I ended up hanging out with, these four girls, one was a Mormon, one was a Quaker, one went to the Baptist church, but she called herself a free thinker. So I think maybe she was really maybe an agnostic. And the other one was a Baha'i. And we were all friends. such a strange combination. It makes me laugh now. And they were all very serious, though, about their beliefs. They were very, like, the Mormon girl told me she went to the Mormon church every night. And I thought, wow, that's like too much. I would not want to go to church every night. I really didn't know too much of what they believed, except I knew they believed Jesus came to the United States, which I thought was kind of silly. That was pretty much all I knew about the Mormon religion. The Baha'i girl kept inviting me to meetings. She kept saying, we have these meetings every month or whatever. And she finally gave me the address. And so I talked my father into driving me there, because I didn't have a driver's license yet. And my father didn't really want to do it, but I talked him into it. And I guess he couldn't think of a good reason not to take me. My father was an agnostic. I forgot to mention that. So he was not into any religious view. And so we set off on this journey to find this house where they were going to have the meeting. And it was in an area my father didn't know very well, apparently, but my father also had a terrible sense of direction, and he would get lost very easily.
I know
Even though he
that.
traveled around the world all the time, but he couldn't. Driving was something else.
I don't have a good sense of direction, and I'm a former pilot, private
Oh,
pilot.
yeah,
I
yeah.
thank God for all the instruments to help you figure out where you are, because without them, I'd be totally lost.
Yeah, my father worked as a navigator, I think, on a plane or something, when he was in the military part of the time. I mean, then he went into the Foreign Service, and yeah, I find it so ironic Now I happen to have a really good sense of direction, and so did my mother. So I think I'd inherited it from her. But my father he got lost looking for this place. And of course, in those days, you didn't have cell phones. You couldn't call and ask for directions. And we were driving around in residential areas. There wasn't like a gas station where you could stop and ask. And we drove for a while. My father just finally got frustrated and gave up, and we went home. So I never made it to the Baha'i meeting, which I guess was a good thing. I don't know if it would have affected me or not. I probably would have found it very interesting. But I wasn't a group joiner. I don't think I would have joined. And I also went to Quaker meetings with a Quaker girl. I got very interested in pacifism. And so that was kind of my mindset. As I went into college, I had decided that I would reject Christianity because I thought, these friends of mine have other religions, and I can explore and decide for myself what to believe. I don't have to go to a church that my mother wants me to go to. And so when I went to college, that was my thinking. And I actually went to Quaker meetings for a year, my freshman year. But I was very interested still in these kind of powers of the mind and otherworldly supernatural things. And then in college, I got interested in Eastern religions because I did a special independent project on Gandhi. And I had to read a biography of Gandhi. It was either a biography. Yeah, I think it was a biography, not an autobiography. And then I had to read a book that he admired a lot. And I got very wrapped up in this some of the Hindu stuff I read about. And I knew somebody at college who said she could see auras around people. So all of this was intriguing to me. And I forgot to mention, in high school, I started getting interested in astrology because I read the horoscope column every day. At that time, it was written by Jean Dixon. And her column was in most of the newspapers across the United States. And I was fascinated. And actually, my father did take me down. She spoke at the press club down in Washington, D.C. one evening. And my father took me there. He didn't want to take me. He was against anything supernatural, and he thought astrology was ridiculous. But I really wanted to go. And so he took me, and I actually heard her speak, which was thrilling for me. So I had that interest in astrology that started then. And all of this kind of just simmered in the background while I was in college. I would do occasional, give advice to friends of mine who would ask me about astrology. Like they would say, I'm an Aries and I want to go out with John, and he's a Pisces. Do you think we'll get along? So it's almost like dating advice. And I would some of my friends would ask me that because I was seen as the person who would know these things. Now, I didn't know astrology real well, but I knew enough that I could answer their questions, at least to their satisfaction. And then after college, I had more time to read, and I got very interested in communication with the dead. I also should mention I had a few supernatural experiences while I was in college that created more of an interest, a very strong interest in me to look into these areas. One of them was an encounter with a spirit that I thought was a dead person because he told me he told me when he died. He appeared in the bedroom at my grandmother's house where I was staying over a college holiday, a college break, and told me the date that he died. And so this created an interest in contact with the dead. And after I got out of college, I was reading a lot of books on that in that area. And then I started reading about a bit later about reincarnation. And I also went to a couple of psychics and later an astrologer. So I was slowly, kind of building this foundation without realizing I was doing that to get drawn into more deeply into these areas because they intrigued me. And I felt like there was information there that if you really searched for it and knew how to find it, you could find it. And that this kind of information was something most people weren't aware of, or they didn't believe it existed, but that I really did believe it existed. And so I just continued on this path, reading different things about these topics. And then I decided I wanted to study it in a more concrete way. I wanted something more organized. And I decided to take some classes. Actually, I need to go back before that. I did take some classes, but before that happened, I forgot two things that I need to mention that happened 2 or 3 years before I took the classes. One was, this was a class, although they didn't call it that. It was a course. And the people who taught it would travel around and teach it. And it was called Inner Light Consciousness. But their headquarters actually was in and I think they still exist in southeastern Virginia, out in the countryside. And the head of this organization, or one of their main teachers, at least at the time, was a Hindu. And this course was offered. I was living in Atlanta at the time. All of this searching and these encounters and this reading was all happening while I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, which is where I went several months after I had graduated from college. And so Quaker House, I was going to meetings at Quaker House, and Quaker House actually hosted the course offered by Inner Light Consciousness. That's how I found out about it. They made an announcement, and they were letting this group use their building for the course. And so in my mind, the Quakers were endorsing it. Now, I don't know if they were or not, but they were okay with this. They were okay with these people using the building. And the name of it, the Inner Light Consciousness, attracted me because in Quakerism, the idea is that every man has the inner light. And that is your ultimate guide, is the inner light. It's not God's word. I don't consider Quakerism to be actually Christian. And so
I'm sorry to interrupt. I know nothing about Quakerism, and this is the first time I learned this. Oh, just a quick question, and I'm so sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to high school at Walter Johnson in Bethesda, Maryland.
Okay, so we probably grew up in the same general
area. You grew up in this area?
I graduated Jeb Stuart High School in 1980.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you were in Virginia, though.
Yes.
Yeah, Virginia was kind of like a distant land to me because I lived in Maryland, so it's like I knew, of course I knew about Virginia and met some people from Virginia, but it was so different to me. But then later, after college, my parents had, when my father retired from the Foreign Service, he took a second career, but they lived in Arlington, Virginia. And after college, I went and lived there for several months before I moved to Atlanta. So then I got more familiar with Northern Virginia. And we had lived in Northern Virginia when I was really young, but I was really young at the time. And so, I didn't remember it that well. So, so I went to high school in Bethesda and graduated from Walter Johnson. And then I went to college in Florida.
And then you're here in Atlanta. And
now I'm in Atlanta. I'm going to Quaker House, this Inner Light. So the Quakers, when I went to Quaker House in Atlanta, they had a library, and a lot of the books were the history of Quakerism and books written by well-known Quakers, books about people like William Penn. And I was a bookworm. So I was reading these books. So I read about the history of Quakerism and George Fox, who started it. I think he had been Methodist. But I think he's the one who said every man has his inner light. And really, that's the authority for the Quaker, for the original Quaker teachings. And that's the way they were brought over to this country in that form. And that's the kind of Quakerism you find in the eastern part of the United States. There was later, and I don't know the history of this, but later there was a branch that developed of Quakerism that supposedly is evangelical. Now, the original Quakers don't have pastors. There's no such thing as a pastor. Everybody sits around in silence until someone feels moved to speak, and then you speak. And then when it seems like it's the end of the meeting, there's certain people in the meeting who they start shaking hands to the person next to them, and then they shake hands, and it goes around the room, and that's the end of the meeting. But the supposed evangelical Quakerism has pastors. I don't know a lot about it, but I have found it to be, at least from what I can tell, rather progressive. So I don't think that Quakerism has a firm foundation in Christianity or in the Bible. So that's my opinion. I hope that doesn't bother anybody, but that's my opinion of it. So I think because I was in this kind of mindset in the Quakers, I was very open to other beliefs, and the inner light consciousness was like a crash course in the New Age. That's really what it was. They taught us about healing with our mind, doing remote healing. We sat around and chanted Elohim.
Wow.
Yeah, we and I remember the guy when he did this. And this wasn't the Hindu. The main teacher was a Hindu guy, but he came one evening to talk to us, but other than that, he was not there. There was another man who was teaching. And when he was teaching us this chant, he said, this word is in the Bible. And I thought, oh, okay, and so we're chanting Elohim, but we weren't told why we were chanting it or what it means, which is kind of interesting. So it was just kind of this magical, spiritual, sacred word to chant. And we talked about dreams and all of these. It was very new agey. The whole thing was new agey, and we had a guided visualization every night. And a guided visualization, which is sometimes called, it can also be guided imagery, as a form of guided visualization. And what it is when somebody tells you, they guide you through a meditation. So what they first do is they'll tell you things that will relax you. So you usually close your eyes. You're sitting or lying down on the floor, maybe. The lights are usually low, and they'll have you do this certain breathing, the slow breathing, and seeing certain things in your mind to relax you, like you're on a boat floating down a stream. Sometimes you're in an elevator going down. Sometimes you're on a cloud and you're floating up. I've done all of those. I've been through many guided visualizations when I was in the New Age. And so that's done. And then they start by telling you what to see in your mind. And so we did this every night. And then on the last night, the teacher said, now tonight it's going to be a little different, because at the end of this meditation, it's also called guided meditation, you will meet your spiritual master. And so he said, your spiritual master will be with you from the moment you meet your spiritual master will be with you the rest of your life. So we all knew that this was not a person who was going to walk in the door. We all knew this was somebody on another dimension of reality. And I don't know what other people thought. I figured that this was going to be somebody who had lived many lives on earth and had advanced to this higher level where he was willing to be a teacher to people on earth. And this is not known in the New Age as a spirit guide. But this man didn't use the term spirit guide. He used the term spiritual master. So I did encounter my spiritual master. And I felt his presence with me from that moment on. It was very strong. And that at that point, I feel like my own opinion of that is that that was kind of an initiation into the occult and the New Age, because it really propelled me forward at a very rapid pace. Once that happened, a lot of other things started happening. I started meditating with a Tibetan Buddhist group in Atlanta, and I would come every week and listen to their teachings. And I bought the books by their leader, and I was reading their books. And by the way, it was not the Dalai Lama. People probably think the Dalai Lama is the only spiritual leader in Tibetan Buddhism, but there are actually 4 branches of Tibetan Buddhism. They're usually called schools of Tibetan Buddhism. And the Dalai Lama is the head of one of them, but whoever was the head of that particular branch was made the Dalai Lama. I think a couple of centuries ago, I can't remember, somewhere in history. And so he's technically the head of Tibet, although he's not in Tibet because of China. But technically he's the spiritual religious leader of Tibet. But then there's 3 other schools, and they each have their own leader. And this particular leader that I was following was the leader of another school, but he had come to the United States. He started the very well-known Naropa Institute in Boulder, Colorado, which pretty much every New Ager knows about, even if they've never been there. It's called the Naropa Institute, and it's in Boulder, Colorado.
And you spell it?
Yeah, Naropa, Naropa Institute.
Yes.
Yeah, they have classes, and so the man who started it was the leader of Chogyam Trungpa is his name. He died in the 1980s. He was known as the bad boy of Buddhism.
Well, I'll tell you why I gasped a little bit.
Oh,
The story of Sharon Stern. She got involved in Bhutto, and then she committed suicide. She went
who
to
got involved in what?
her name is Sharon Stern. She went to Naropa University,
Oh,
and there was this Bhutto dancing, Buddhist influenced
yes.
Japanese
Is she the
dance.
dancer? I think I read about her.
Yeah, that's why I gasped. It was this is okay. If anything really creeped me out was just seeing where this leads. And
Yes.
this was a tragic what can happen with, when those spirits strike.
Yes, that is a tragic story. That was in
That's why I
a
gasped
magazine.
when you said
Oh,
Naropa.
okay. I noticed there was a look on you were getting, I noticed there was a reaction on your face
Oh
from
my
that.
goodness.
Yeah, yeah. It's and Naropa is well known among New Agers. I mean, a lot of them go there. I never went there, but I knew about it. I finally did see it as a Christian when I was in Denver for a conference, and a friend wanted to drive to Boulder and go into some bookstores, and I went with him, and we walked past the Naropa Institute, but we didn't have time to go in.
So the founder of that institute was
Chogyam Trungpa, the head of the Tibetan Buddhist school that I was involved in and I was following. I wasn't a like, I did not become an official follower. I was just coming to the meetings every week. They tried to recruit me. They invited me to the private meetings. I was going to the public meetings, the meetings that are open to the public. And after I went for a while, they told me after every meeting there was this table with all this food. I mean, a lot of really good food on it. It was great. And I would go over there, and because usually I would go there around, before dinner time. So I hadn't had any dinner. And so, there's all this food. You go out there and you're eating, I don't know, fruit and sandwiches and whatever. And I would stand around and talk. Of course, a lot of the people there they all lived in that house together. All the followers in Atlanta that ran this meditation lived there in that house. And of course, so they would be standing around talking to people. And so one of the main people said to me, we'd like you to come to our private meetings on Wednesday nights. maybe not Wednesday. I think these public meetings were Wednesday. So the private was another night, Monday or something. He said, wait, why don't you come on Monday night when we have our private meeting? And I thought, why does he want me to come? And I said, well, what do you do there? And he said, oh, we teach different things. And then he said, like the mudras. And I said, what are the mudras? I didn't know what they were, but I do know now. It's connected to yoga, but it's also in Tibetan Buddhism. It's hand movements, but they attach not only a meaning to the hand movements, but there's a supposedly Tibetan Buddhism is very esoteric and occultic, and supposedly you're manipulating energy with your hands, like internally, when you do these certain movements. There's a very strong spiritual significance to it. And I said, so what are mudras? And he said, oh, well, you learn how to put your hands in different positions. And I thought, I didn't understand, I thought, well, why would you do that? I didn't really get it. I figured it had to be spiritual, but I didn't want to go because I didn't want to be, I guess I sensed that they were trying to recruit me, and I didn't want to become part of a closed group because I wanted to be free. I knew that if I started going there, that they would either expect me to join and become more of, an official follower, and that they probably wouldn't want me to go to other groups. And so after he asked me that, and I had been going for a while, I'm not sure how long I've been going, maybe close to a year. I kind of stopped going because I didn't want them to keep pressuring me to join. And so then I don't remember how this happened. I think I was reading some books on Zen Buddhism. I got into Zen Buddhism, and that's where I stayed. I ended up staying and doing Zen. I went to Zen Buddhist meditation groups. None of them ever asked me to join any group. I don't know. I'm sure there was probably some groups there, but I was never invited to join, which was probably good. And I did Zen Buddhist meditation until I was saved, which was 12 years, for 12 years later. Now, at this point, I had been in the New Age about, a good 8 years. And although my interest had started earlier, and after the inner light consciousness and Tibetan Buddhism and kind of doing some Zen Buddhist stuff, I decided to take classes. So now we're up to where I'm taking classes at a place called the Foundation for Truth. And yes, I know. And when you think about the name, it's kind of sad. It's amusing. It's sad and amusing. Yes. The Foundation for Truth, because it was basically full of the people who ran it were psychics, mediums, people who did tarot card reading, past life regression, all this esoteric New Age occult teaching. And that's everything there that's what it was. That's what they taught. That's what all the people there did. All the classes were in those areas. So I took a numerology class. I took past life regression. I took psychic development. Psychic development and astrology were the first 2 classes I took. And I signed up for both of them. They were on different nights. So I went 2 nights a week. And, you learn all these different things in the psychic development class to develop supposedly your psychic powers. The teacher talked about our spirit guides. She went around to each one of us and told us the spirit guides she could see around us. And the astrology class, needless to say, was learning astrology. So I was doing both of those for a while. Then I started taking other classes too, like numerology and past life regression. I didn't take the tarot card class, although later I had tarot cards. And my whole life just was going in this direction. I was working a regular job in the day. I would take these classes at night. I was meeting people who had the same kind of interest. I was getting readings from these mediums and psychics. And then as time went by, this particular place closed down. And one of the astrologers in Atlanta, who was kind of a well-known astrologer there, he and another astrologer set up their own business called the Daily Planets, and they started teaching astrology there. And it was very near to where I lived. And so I continued taking classes there. There's a lot of stories about that Foundation of Truth I could tell you, and I don't know that you want me to go into all that, but they also taught the Kabbalah. And it was a 2-year course. When you signed up for it, you had to pay for 2 years.
Wow.
And if you stopped going to the class, you didn't get your money back. Many of my friends took it. Now, okay, I think I mixed something up here. I'm sorry. I was taking the astrology classes at Daily Planets while the Foundation of Truth was still going, because the teachers at the Daily Planets were not affiliated with the Foundation of Truth. So sorry, I got mixed up there. So I stopped taking the astrology classes there, and I was taking them at the Daily Planets, because it was not too long after I took classes for about 2 years that I took the exam that you had to take in Atlanta to get a business license. So this is another story. I'm sorry, there's so many.
No,
It's so complicated.
I'm eating this up. I'm eating this
okay.
up. Now,
This is
just for the viewer's sake, my channel usually is outreach to kind of the science, physics, biology type.
okay.
This ties very much, and it's hard for me to talk about it. As a teen, I was heavily into what you're describing. I had to leave it. One reason I'm in science, it freaked me. I was so scared of what I experienced. And I may share I've shared a little bit about this is public, but I don't talk about it because it was so traumatic. I said, I want to leave this so far behind me. I just want to do science, and I want to be in a Christian church because I feel safe. I mean, this is how dark it was.
Yeah, it is. It's
So
very dark.
I was
Yes,
into
it's a very
astrology.
dark area.
I was into psychic stuff. I'd seen apparitions. So I mean,
yeah. So you know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And this is why I've been I felt lifted up to be in a Christian church and to be studying God's creation, and the idea of science seemed to purify my soul from all the occult influences,
all this dark stuff.
Yes. So
absolutely.
No need to apologize. I'm eating up every detail.
Oh, okay. Yes. So in Atlanta, the astrologers and the city council had come to an agreement. At the time, astrology was illegal. It was classified as fortune telling, and it is still true in many cities and towns today. On the books, they probably have laws against fortune telling because there's so many con artists in fortune telling. And but there was an astrologer in Atlanta who's kind of well known. She's probably not well known to maybe outside Atlanta or to people who don't know astrology, but her name was Maxine Taylor. And she went to Congressman, well, he wasn't a congressman then, I'm sorry, he became one later. He was on the city council, White Fowler. And they decided, she said, look, we don't want the con artists out there either. But we're not con artists. Serious astrologers know their stuff. We're not trying to con people. And she said what the city could do, or maybe he came up with the idea, in order to weed out the con artists, but let these serious astrologers like Maxine Taylor do their thing legally, they would have a requirement that you had to have a business license to practice in the city limits. But to qualify for the business license, you had to prove you knew astrology by taking an exam. So at the time, the American Federation of Astrologers would give exams in different cities, different times of the year. American Federation of Astrologers has been around for a while. I don't know when they started, but they've been around for a while. And so real serious astrologers will take their exam to be able to say to people, I'm certified by the AFA. I took their exam and I passed. And, here's my certificate. I've passed their exam to kind of show they have credentials. So what Maxine Taylor and White Fowler came up with was they would offer the exam locally because that way you wouldn't have to travel to other cities to take it. And they would offer it once a year in Atlanta, and they would have a board of astrology examiners, astrologers who'd been doing astrology, would formulate the exam, and they would give the exam at City Hall, and then the astrologers would grade it. And if you passed the exam, then you could buy a business license. If you didn't pass, you had to take the exam another time. So you could still take the AFA test if you wanted. If you wanted to travel to another city and take their test, you could do it. And that would, if you passed, you would be qualified to get the business license. But you had to pass either the AFA test or the test given by the Atlanta Board of Astrology Examiners. So my teacher, my main astrology teacher, there were two of them there, but he was kind of the main one. He helped prepare me for the exam, and I took it. It's a 7-hour exam. And a lot of people are really surprised when I tell them that, because they're like 7 hours for astrology. But here's the thing, a lot of, especially Christians, don't know. The occult is very complicated. It's actually complex. And the more you get into it and the deeper you go, the more complex it gets. And I think that's a way of trapping you in it. It just keeps drawing you in, and it keeps challenging you. And so people who like challenges, like me, you're drawn in and you want to keep going, you want to learn more, and you want to keep learning. Well, astrology, you have to know, there are two things you have to know to pass the exam. One is you have to know how to mathematically compute the chart, and you have to have all the formulas memorized. You can't have a cheat sheet or anything. So you have to memorize the formulas, and it's actually using mathematics. That's the part that is very sciencey. But of course, astrology is not a science, but a lot of people think it is because of this math part, and because it has to do with the actual planets and the sun and moon. So people think it's kind of like astronomy, which of course it's not like astronomy at all. But it uses some of the same data astronomy uses. So you compute the chart mathematically. You figure out the local birth time. You have to do math. Like you can get a time of, okay, this person was born at 4:15 p.m. Central Time on June 1st, 1985. You have to figure out the local time, because of course our time, we don't do local time. We go by, Eastern Time, Central Time, Mountain Time, and Pacific Time in the United States. But the time, if you're out on the shore of Maryland, and you're or even out in the ocean a little bit, and you're further west towards the Central Time Zone, the times are actually technically different. They're not actually the same. They differ because, you're moving from east to west there. So you have to figure out the local time, and then you have to do all the math to set up the chart. And you have to interpolate, do something called interpolation. Now, math was my worst subject, and I absolutely hated math. I didn't do well in it, but I was so determined to learn astrology that I made myself get through the math. That shows how determined I was, because I thought the math would kill me, but I did it, and I learned how to do it, and I memorized the formulas, and I managed to do okay on that part on the test. And the other part of the test is interpretation. So they give you the data of a person. They don't tell you who it is, but it's the data of a real person, the birth data. So they'll give you the date, the time, and the place of birth, because the place matters too when you're doing the chart. So you use all your stuff you've memorized. Now you can use this thing called the table of houses for setting up the chart, and you use the ephemeris for the position of the planets and the sun and the moon, but you have to have the mathematical formulas memorized. So you set up the chart according to the data they give you. Then they give you a chart, and here again, a chart of a real person, and they don't tell you who it is, and you have to write out an interpretation as though you're talking to that person, as though this person has come to you as an astrologer and has said, okay, tell me what my chart means. So you have to write out what you would say to them. So that's the second part of the test. That's why it's 7 hours. You know, it took me half the time to do the mathematical part and then half the time to do the interpretation part. And I mean, I was working till they, you know, up until he's, you know, they said time. You have to put your pencil or pen down now. Pretty much, I think all of us, you know, there were only 6 or 7 of us taking the test. I think all of us pretty much, I don't think anyone finished more than maybe 5 or 10 minutes early. So I passed the exam. I went and bought a business license. So that's kind of a long story there about the test. Now, as far as I know, that test is still offered in Atlanta. I don't know if people are actively taking it. I don't know if the requirements have changed. You know, I have no reason to really know about that stuff anymore. But that's the way it was then. And the Astrological Society in Atlanta at that time was very large. It had over 100 members. It was very active. And I was going to the Astrological Society. I had my business license. I was beginning to get clients. And so I was a certified professional astrologer. And that's what it said on my business card. And then I started teaching classes. Yeah, but that's my cards had a certified professional astrologer, and then they have some little logo or a symbol there. And you know, I gave those out to people. I got clients. Then my clients would tell other people. So most of my business was word of mouth. I also was the Foundation of Truth was still going. I was also the resident astrologer there. So if someone came or called and asked for an astrologer, they would call me and I would go there and do, you know, the astrology chart for the person. So that's what I was doing. And I was also working and doing the astrology in the evenings. And then at the Astrological Society, I don't remember when, but maybe 3 years after I was certified, I started teaching classes at the society. And then I was very active there in this Astrological Society. I was still doing my Buddhist meditation, you know, still reading my New Age material. And my idea of God, people might be wondering, what did I believe about God and what did I believe about Jesus? My idea about God was that he was a force or an energy that we all came from and we all go back to. And Jesus was an enlightened teacher like Buddha who came and gave these wise teachings for the people who want to follow him, you know, and then the people who want to follow Buddha can follow Buddha, and the people who want to follow, you know, someone from the Sufi teacher, they can follow the Sufi teacher. And, you know, someone who has a Hindu guru can follow the Hindu guru. You know, in my mind, they're all on the same level. They were all spiritual teachers. And even though I knew the teachings were not the same, I felt they were all spiritual paths that led to the same place. And so that was my view. And so that's how I saw Jesus. I had a Bible. Sometimes I even, I also wrote for New Age journals. I was an active writer. I wrote for several New Age publications. And sometimes I would quote from the Bible in my articles. But of course, I always gave it a New Age meaning. And probably, I think it might be helpful at this point to give my definition of the New Age, because some people listening might be wondering, like a lot of people have maybe a vague idea of what it is. And some people may even not be sure. or they may even have the wrong idea of what it is. So the way I define the New Age is it's a network of beliefs that draws from three main areas: Gnosticism, going way back to the first century, but mainly the Gnostics didn't really develop until the second and third centuries, but you can find some of the teachings infiltrating the church in the first century addressed. They're addressed by the writers of scripture. Of course, they don't use the word Gnostic because they weren't using that word, but they talk about it in Colossians and First John. The Gnostics in the church were teaching that Jesus didn't have a real human body, because the Gnostics thought the material world was evil and had been created by an evil God. The God of the Old Testament was an evil God who created the world. And so a spiritual, teacher like Jesus would not come in a real human body. And they were teaching that. And so that's one reason you find in First John, that which we've touched, that which we've heard, that which we've seen, that which we've touched with our own hands, affirming the humanity of Jesus, that he was in a real physical body. And of course, that makes the physical resurrection especially important. It's different from other religions where you have the resuscitation of these gods. You have a real physical bodily resurrection in Christianity. It's just such an important thing. And not just for that reason, but that's one of the reasons it's important. So the Gnosticism is a big thing. And so you find in the New Age a division between material and spiritual, and the spiritual is always superior. It's always superior. And in some cases, New Agers who are really into the non-dual Hinduism, Vedanta Hinduism, believe that the world is even an illusion or just a projection of our thoughts. It doesn't have a real substantive reality. And now that's one view, and then you can find other views, but that is one view. But there tends to be that matter-spirit duality. I mean, not just duality, but like a sharp division with the spirit always. So you're always trying to evolve spiritually, which means you're evolving away from the material world and away from the body. So that's the idea. The other big influence is Eastern religions, mainly Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism. All three of those are influences. Some people get more involved with one than the other. So they might get more involved with Buddhism than Hindu teachings, or more involved with Taoism than Hinduism. And some might, like myself, were influenced by all three. I was influenced by all three of those. And then the third major component or source of New Age teaching is a much more recent movement called New Thought, the New Thought movement. Sometimes it's referred to as the mind sciences. And this is a movement that really goes back to the 18th century, to a man named Emanuel Swedenborg in Sweden, who claimed to get visits from angels and messages from angels. And I think he said he even traveled. I can't remember now if he even traveled somewhere with the angels. And he wrote prolifically. He's a very prolific writer. And he wrote all these ideas down. And he claimed that they were teaching a true Christianity. He had been in the Lutheran church, but he started teaching what he was getting from the angels, which included a denial of the Trinity, not surprisingly, and a lot of other heretical doctrines. But he also taught that heaven and hell are states of mind. Illness is caused by bad thinking. Okay, that was a big one that became a major component of New Thought. And these ideas kind of went out into the world, and various people picked up on them and started teaching them with their own ideas. And so New Thought kind of coalesced from a lot of different teachings that more or less, not just Swedenborg, but he was a big source of it, originated with him. And then they were kind of out there. It's a really complicated history. but it also was a part of spiritualism, which was a movement that was based on getting communications from the dead. And a lot of the early New Thought teachers were involved in spiritualism. And so there was, in the early New Thought movement, you will also find a lot of spiritualism, a lot of contact with the dead. And it really started to probably pick up steam in the, really even in the, like with a man named Anton Mesmer, who lived, I think, from the late 18th century to the early 19th century. And we get the word mesmerize from him. Yes. And Mesmer believed in something he called animal magnetism. He said the planets exuded this energy. He said a fluid, but he was really talking about an energy. He wasn't talking about a physical fluid. And that you could use this power to heal. And so he was supposedly a healer, and he would go, you would use magnets to manipulate this power. And he had these special devices built that he would use and supposedly heal people. And he had a large following. He traveled all over Europe. I can't remember if he came to the United States or not. I don't think he did, but he traveled all over Europe. His teachings became very widespread. And then later, a man named Phineas Quimby picked up on Mesmer's teachings and started teaching them, but he added other things into it. For example, Quimby said, and he lived in the 1800s, he said that he was healing the way Jesus healed, and that Jesus knew how to manipulate this power. And Quimby said he had discovered this, and he was using it to heal people. And he said he called it Christian Science. He said, this is a science that comes from what Christ did. And so it was called Christian Science. Well, I know that word is familiar to you and probably a lot of people listening. And that is because Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of the Christian Science Church, studied the teachings of Quimby and claimed she was healed by Quimby's methods. So along comes Mary Baker Eddy in the 1800s, studies Quimby, and then comes up with her own teachings based on Quimby and her own ideas, and interpreting the Bible with the Christian Science mindset. She taught that nothing exists but God is divine mind. Okay, so God's not really personal. He's divine mind, and nothing exists except divine mind. So if you're ill or you have pain, it's because you're trapped in the idea that this world is real and that you actually have a real body with real pain. And that's why you're feeling the pain. If you are in tune with divine mind, you wouldn't be feeling that pain. So that, I'm not an expert on Christian Science, but that's kind of one of the major ideas that she taught. And there were two others, so that's the Christian Science Church. Two other churches came out of the New Thought movement. Unity, which was called Unity School of Christianity at the time, and the Church of Religious Science. They both came out of the New Thought movement. Unity was founded by the Ericksons, a husband and wife. She had been influenced by Christian Science, and he had been influenced by some Buddhism and Hinduism. And they came up with their teachings, which actually focus on Jesus a lot more than I think Christian Science or the other one, the other church. There's a lot about Jesus and unity, but Jesus is a man who became aware of his divine nature, and he attained Christ consciousness. So this term Christ consciousness is also very big in the New Age. So the ideas that were in unity, some of those ideas are in the New Age. And the idea that also there's the idea that illness can be cured by your mind. In other words, you're bringing illness on by your negative thoughts. So you can cure yourself with more positive thoughts and seeing yourself as well. And this also are ideas that you find in the New Age. So those are some of the New Thought teaching. Now, I'll just mention the last one quickly. The Church of Religious Science was, because this church in particular had a big influence on the church. The Church of Religious Science was started by Fenwick and Ernest Holmes, who were brothers. And I can't remember the dates when all these started. I think that I know the Christian Science Church, I think, was started in the late 1800s. I think Unity was started, I could be wrong, I think it was started around 1912, might have been a little earlier, and the Church of Religious Science somewhere around there. I need to double check on those dates, because if I don't keep reminding myself, I forget them. So the Holmes brothers started the Church of Religious Science, and Ernest Holmes was very big on the idea that there are spiritual laws, and if we learn how to manipulate those, we can do things that we otherwise couldn't do. So he believed in, for example, affirmations, where you say something, and by saying it and believing it, you can make it manifest. And he was real big on affirmations, which is also in the New Age.
I had contact with that.
With affirmations? Yeah.
Yes, and I'm kind of embarrassed to talk about it, but I might as well. There's this book on how to be more effective in dating, and part of it was affirmations, just to make you feel better. You know, a way a guy can make himself a little bit more attractive is to just be more positive and confident. And so these affirmations, and so a book that was recommended was Louise Hay. I don't know if that name.
Oh yes, Louise Hay. Oh yes, I know all about her. She's a huge. She really was a New Thought. She was actually trained in the Church of Religious Science.
Okay.
But she's a huge figure. She died a few years ago, but she's a huge figure in the New Age.
Well, you know, I'm sorry to have to broach this, but I guess it's going to come up. The reason it's just like, I mean, this is the way I view it. Moses was before Pharaoh, and then Pharaoh had his magicians, and it's like there is a power there. It
Yeah.
does work at some level. That's why it takes a hold of people's lives. That's kind of my.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, I could see people changing for quote unquote the better as they did these affirmations. They started to.
Yeah.
Life seemed to just get better, and
yes.
And so yeah, you start to, you know, you start to perform better at work. You start to be more attractive to the ladies. I'm like, let's keep doing more of this. And I knew guys who just kept doing more of that, and they just okay, they did it religiously, and they were saying, well, look what happened to me, and just like, well, I could see
it's
why
really working. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
It can. Yeah.
so
exactly.
Okay, so the three things in New Age, one is the New Thought, which is this
And
kind of the Christian Science. The second component was the Eastern religion. So what was the first again?
The first was Gnosticism.
Gnosticism. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
So now
I want to say something about, so that's the three areas. I want to say a little bit more about New Thought, because that is a real danger, because the New Thought movement called itself Christian. Now, unlike the New Age does not, now that some New Agers may say they're Christians, and some Christians may think they're Christians and they're actually doing New Age stuff. But technically speaking, the New Age does not take on the Christian label. New Thought does. They say they're Christians, and they use the Bible, and they refer to Jesus. So it is, in a way, more deceptive to Christians because of that.
Okay, so I'm sorry to say this, but I've sensed it creep into the church. And while I was a Christian, even I started to read a little bit of Louise Hay, and just like, this is very interesting.
Yes. Yeah. She's known as the queen of affirmations. Yeah. But see, she was teaching that if you say these things and affirm them and believe them, you'll actually make them happen. And this extends to more than just, I might be able to get dates easier. This extends to, I can manifest a new car, or I can, I can get a house like this. It goes beyond that. This is the thinking behind it. That's the teaching, because the teaching is everything you want exists on some level already. And if you believe it, you can make it happen. So and this is really technically, I would categorize this as sorcery, because this visualization and getting something to manifest, altering reality, is a principle of sorcery.
Okay,
so it's really sorcery, which is completely condemned by God in the Bible.
okay. I'm sorry to just interrupt you again, because now it is getting a little close to home. Maxwell Maltz, psychocybernetics. That
I
okay.
don't know who that. I
Yeah,
probably, because I'm not interested in that area. Probably cybernetics. Is that like computer stuff
cybernetics
or
was,
something?
I'm sorry.
Is that like computer stuff or something?
Yes, it
Or
was borrowed from the idea of building missiles. So I'm like, yeah, I was in the defense
oh,
industry and
right,
aerospace
right.
at the time.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, if you want to be a better athlete, just visualize yourself throwing the basketball. And they did some experiments. And when they did the visualizations, it's like the guys who did the visualizations were able to like hit the target better. And so like at a personal level, I'm sorry to just confess here. It's like, okay, if you want to go out, you have to lose some weight and get, get physically fit. And they said the first thing you do is you visualize yourself putting on your shoes and running. And I said, well, that actually kind of works, you know. Um, I said, okay, it kind of just reduced the stress of worrying about uh, it. You know, it kind of, it probably had some psychological benefit. And I started running. I started getting up into a couple miles. Of course, I noticed, it's embarrassing. I noticed the young ladies were starting to look at me more and just like, okay, well, I'll do more of that. So I
Yeah.
don't think psychocybernetics was inherently um, bad. I mean, athletes use it a lot, but it is just a little, it kind of was like, okay, then you saw Louise Hay. It's like, well, that kind of seemed like the same thing, but I didn't
It
realize the
seemed like the
spiritual,
same thing.
and
Yeah.
it's not. Okay.
No, it's not. And I do want to make, I want to make a comment here, because when you first said, visualizing, if you're throwing a basket into a basketball, throwing a basketball into a basket, to see yourself, to see that ball going in, I just consider that focusing. That's not visualization in the New Age term. The New Age term, when you visualize something, it's to make it, it's because you believe by visualizing it, you're making it happen.
I see. Okay.
In the basketball scenario, you're focusing, you're doing it in order to concentrate. And yeah, maybe seeing it go in encourages you to think that you can, encourages your confidence to think you can get it in. If I see myself throwing it in, then I think, yeah, maybe I can get it in. And your focus, that is not the same thing. That's not the kind of visualization I'm talking about. And that's not what Louise Hay taught. Louise Hay's not teaching this stuff so you can focus or so you feel better about yourself or feel more confident. She's teaching this stuff because she thinks you can alter reality with your mind and with your thoughts. And that's the difference. There's a difference there. And I do have to explain this a lot, because people will think that, like what you described about throwing the basketball into the basket, is the same thing as maybe the New Age or New Thought visualization, but they're not. So the idea is that if you really believe that your thoughts, if I think this and I really believe it, I can actually make it happen just through that. See, just
Okay.
through doing that. You thinking of yourself putting on running shoes probably encouraged you to think you could do it. And so you did it. And you also knew that maybe you would lose some weight if you did it. And that would maybe make the girls like you better. So that's all just kind of logical, normal human thinking. That's not New Age thinking. So there's a difference when it's based on natural things that can happen and that are practical. That's one thing. But when you go into the realm of, I can actually alter reality with my thinking, I can manifest something with my thoughts and my own belief or my own will, which is what it is. Satanism is all about the will, using the will. So, and it's really different from the New Age, but there is that their kind of correlation about the altering reality. And that's why I call it sorcery.
Sorcery.
So that's why, the basketball thing is not sorcery. But if you said, I really need a new car, and you started cutting pictures out of the car you wanted, and you started writing down every day, I am the owner of a 2024, red sports car, whatever, whatever the sports cars are these days. I'm not good on cars. And you say it and think it and you believe it, and you think by doing that you're going to be able to get one. That's where you cross the line into the new age and sorcery territory.
And I'm okay, I might step on some toes here, but I hear kind of that echoed in some Christian circles.
Yes, you do,
Okay.
because where you're hearing that is probably the word of faith movement. And it may have seeped beyond the word of faith movement, where they believe that, they say faith is a force and you can, use your faith. And they think that's how you get well. If you believe that you're not going to be sick, then you won't be sick. See, that's really putting it on you, that you have this power to keep from being sick with your thinking that you aren't sick. It's very similar. It's not, I don't really see it in the mainstream church. There might be individuals who think it, but it's definitely a teaching in the word of faith movement. Now, the other area where I actually wasn't going to mention that area because I don't deal with the word of faith. I consider it it's a cultic movement within the church, and I don't deal with cults. It's kind of a really whole different thing when you're dealing with cults. But I'm just looking outside here. I'm sorry. I'm trying to see if there's a storm because it looks windy and cloudy, and I had some items. Can you edit this part out here? Do you mind? Can we stop right here?
Okay, let me just
for a second. Yeah. Do you mind? Okay.
Okay, we're back in business here.
All right. So I will continue. I wanted to say a few more things about Ernest Holmes, who founded the Church of Religious Science. And we were talking about the difference between just visualizing in the New Age and then visualizing something to help you focus. And I wanted to mention that too, because a lot of people have questions about that area. But Ernest Holmes did teach these specific methods and ideas. And one of his students, somebody who really studied his teachings, actually, there were two of them. Norman Vincent Peale was one, and Robert Schuller was the other. These are both
yes.
Ministers in the church. Norman Vincent Peale had a huge church in New York City that was very popular. And in fact, Trump's parents were members of that church. And so Norman Vincent Peale basically was teaching New Thought principles. And the positive thinking, a lot of people think, well, positive thinking is just having a positive attitude, but that's not what it is. Positive thinking is what I was describing, where you think a certain way in order to make certain things happen, or you think positive to attract positive things to you. You can see it either way or both ways. And this is what Norman Vincent Peale was teaching. And he was teaching, because I saw one of his books that he wrote later, I think it was called Imaging or something like that, where he actually gives advice in the book to a pastor who wants more people to come to his church. And he tells him to go to the church and stand up at the pulpit on a day when it's not Sunday and visualize people coming into the church. And visualize all these people coming, and visualize, the ushers having to get chairs to seat people because all the pews are full. So he's telling pastors in his book to visualize this to help get their church full. Now, clearly, this is not biblical. This has nothing to do with the gospel, has nothing to do with Christ. But that's because Norman Vincent Peale was apparently a disciple of the teachings of Ernest Holmes. And Robert Schuller taught many of the similar things.
Wow. I'm going to just briefly show the screen here. There
Okay.
it is, that book, The Power of Positive Thinking.
Yes. Yes. It is
Wow, I
still,
did not,
it
I
still
didn't.
sells well. It's amazing.
Well,
It's
if I may say this, okay, so there is an aspect scientifically that can start to be spun into a religious.
yes.
So clearly, like me, I was going through my visualizations, and sometimes they say, okay, um, even now, like I get very anxious about like driving, and I'm like,
Uh-huh.
okay, why don't I just imagine myself getting into the car and, you know, uh, sometimes just dealing with phobias. I have lots of phobias, unfortunately.
Uh-huh.
So like,
Uh-huh.
I had to clean some mouse droppings in my ceiling, which is just really gross. And I said,
Yeah.
okay, just imagine yourself, just calm yourself down and say, okay, just imagine yourself having your gloves and your mask, and you're going through and
And just
and if you
and
start to
doing it.
get tense, you just stop. But all psychologists say that they're almost unified. A lot of psychologists disagree about so many things. The one thing you can do is deal, if you have phobias, just engage with your fear, because it'll start to reduce. So I was like, okay, it was just so gross, the thought of it. I said, okay, I'm just gonna imagine myself, with my gloves and I'm just like, okay, then it kind of reduced the anxiety. So I've
Yeah,
had,
but that's just a psychological effect. That's not supernatural.
right, but I could
That's
see how,
that's that's the difference.
but I could see how people can actually start getting benefit from these psychological visualizations, and then it's very natural then for them to start looking and adding the supernatural component, and they may
Yeah.
get a little benefit
Yes.
because they are visualizing things. And sometimes
Right.
if you do have a positive outlook, you're a little bit more persistent.
Yeah, but a positive outlook is not the same thing as positive thinking as taught by New Thought.
Right.
It
And
is not the same. We're talking about two different things here.
right. I think that's how it starts to get a hold in someone's life, because
Yes.
there's
Yes.
enough kind of sensible stuff there that actually
Yeah.
will improve your life. And you're like,
Yeah.
well, why don't I try more of this? So you have kind of, with the nourishment, a lot of poison, and you don't realize it. I think
Right.
that's how some
Right.
people
Because
get hooked. Yeah.
right. Because it sounds a lot like one sounds like the other.
Yes.
So yeah, so you don't realize that you're actually kind of crossing a line and getting into something else. Yeah, no, I agree with you. That's one of the pitfalls. That's one of the dangers, I think, is that it can sound very innocent and it sounds just like I'm just focusing or I'm just being more positive about, what I need to do or whatever. And then it seems more like a psychological tool than a supernatural teaching, teaching about using a supernatural power. And that, the book The Secret, which was huge several years ago, promoted by Oprah. The Secret is nothing but rehashed New Thought, but
Mhm.
it was picked up by a lot of Christians. I went online. I happened to see Oprah do her program on it. That's how I found out about it. And I started doing searches on my computer and to see if there was any Christian response to it. And the only Christian responses I could find to it were positive, except sometimes they would say, well, you can't, there's some things in it that aren't, there's some things in this that aren't Christian, but, on the whole, it's okay. And the book quotes scripture. And the video and the book are the same. It came out as a video and then a book, and I saw the video and I also read the book, and I have 2 articles on it on my website, which, by the way, I should say before I forget, and it's a new website. It's christiananswersnewage.com. So
I
it's
will put it in. Yes.
christiananswersnewage.com. Okay, good. Can you
I
put
will
it
provide
below the
links
program?
in the video description
Okay,
for the
great.
viewers, so they don't have to worry. All you,
Don't have to
you'll just
remember that.
you don't
Okay,
have to
okay.
remember it.
Just go to the link.
Go and
Just
click.
go to the link. And
Yeah.
you can do it in the search box. You can put New Thought. You can put The Secret. I have an article on New Thought that I wrote for seminary. I went to Southern Evangelical Seminary and graduated in 2011 with a master's in religion. And So several of my articles were seminary papers because my professors would let me write on topics related to my ministry. I mean, I would ask them, I'd say, can I make this topic on this because it relates to my ministry, for a paper that I had to do if you had some kind of choice in the subject. So that article on New Thought was a seminary paper. And then I have 2 articles on The Secret. So we see how some of this, these ideas get confused with Christianity because New Thought quotes the Bible and, does all that. Now, the New Age drew on New Thought, and a lot of those ideas are in the New Age, but it's still the case that the New Thought movement and the New Age movement are 2 different movements, and they're still distinct. They're not one and the same. So I don't want people to think they're just the same. But there are a lot of people out there who maybe had New Thought influences or were maybe in New Thought churches who also started gravitating towards the New Age. And so they have their New Thought background and ideas, and they also have New Age. So you find, hybrids of New Age, New Thought people. So that's so I departed from my story there and gave a little mini lecture on the New Age, which is fine because I love to do it. So because I love to explain things because I see so much confusion about these areas, and I'm not surprised because it is a confusing area. The New Age is so vast; it's just so vast, and there's so many aspects to it. It has so many different faces that it can be very confusing for people, so, and then the occult is another area, but the New Age and the occult overlap. So that I was a New Ager, but I did astrology, which is an occult practice. So that's another area that can be confusing. So anyway, I have a lot of articles on my website, so people can also go there, and I address a lot of New Age topics and New Age books there.
If I may probe one thing about your astrology background. So you had clients.
Yes.
Did you feel that you were giving them like potent information that they believed and trust, that caused them to trust what you had to say and describe about?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Oh, there was no doubt in my mind because they told me that. I mean, they told me this is so helpful. Or they would say, wow, I can't believe that's in my chart. Or how did you know that? Oh, yeah. I mean, the charts were accurate in the sense that the people hearing them believed what I was saying was true. I mean, of course, I can only know what they told me. I didn't know. There were very few people I did charts for that I actually knew. Most people I didn't know, or I didn't know them well. But most of the time they were strangers. They were people I'd never met before. And I would be telling them about their childhood, about their relationships. Now, there's a lot of reasons that it seems to work. And of course, one of them is coincidence. Okay, can't rule that out. The other is there's a lot of general information that applies to a lot of people. Okay, so especially in certain age groups. So if you're talking to someone in maybe their late 20s, a job might be on their mind, or finding a new job. Okay. For a lot of women, relationships are the big issue. For mothers, it's their children. So there's a lot of general information that fits people, especially in certain ages. But I wasn't saying those things because of that. I was looking at the chart. But, of course, I had those things in mind. And somebody might even ask me a question like, I've been having a lot of trouble in my marriage. What do you see in my chart that relates to that? Okay. So there's a lot of things that work there that go to interpreting the chart. So I think a lot of it is coincidence. A lot of it is general information, general characteristics of people and what's going on in their lives. And so the astrologer is addressing those areas. And then there's the demonic element. I did have spirit guides. I felt my spirit guide was helping me with the chart. And so many times things would come into my mind. I would see a picture, and it would be directly related to the client. And I would tell them about it, and they would say, yeah, how did you know that? So I can, if you want me to, I'll give you a couple of examples that kind of illustrate this.
Yes.
I don't know if you want me to or not.
Yes, but briefly, if I may say this, in one of my, I'm a creation scientist, and
Right.
you met my mentor and friend, Dr. Johnson.
Yes. He's a great guy. He's a great guy. Yeah.
And my favorite creationist video is Alien Intrusion. And it does talk about demon possession, UFOs, etc.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, this seems so off the wall, but the Bible talks about demon possession. And one characteristic of some people demon possessed is they start to be able to, or if people are in the middle of an exorcism, sometimes the demon would direct the person to say stuff and start talking about personal details that no one else should know in front of the people around. And so
Yeah.
what you were describing, how your spirit master was able to give you knowledge of certain details you shouldn't have access to, it's expressed itself in other areas.
Yeah. Well, this is why this is how psychics and mediums, this is why sometimes they're very accurate. This is how they aren't here's the thing. No psychic, astrologer, or medium is ever 100% accurate. And I was even told in a psychic development class, which of course was taught by a psychic, and he had been a psychic a long time. He was kind of a mentor to me, actually. He and the man who taught me astrology were like mentors to me. But he always told us, the best psychic on their best day is, I think he said maybe 80% correct. And that's the best psychic on their best day. So in other words, most psychics on most days are not even close to that. So they would admit, psychics themselves would admit they're not always accurate. And of course they can't be, because this kind of knowledge, I mean, only God has knowledge of people like that. Nobody, no person can have that kind of, even demons have limited knowledge because they don't know everything and God limits them. But sometimes information gets through. It makes the psychic and the astrologer look very good, if you can give a very specific statement that's true. And everything I would say to the person would ring true with them. Also, I think people going to a psychic or an astrologer they're listening and they're latching on to things that they think fit them. And they exclude the things that don't, selective listening or selective memory. Later, they remember the things that they think are true and they forget the things that aren't true. That's also something that operates in this arena, which makes these things seem accurate or makes it seem to quote unquote work. So there are a lot of factors here that make it work, because astrology is not scientific. It's not based on science. It's actually based, the zodiac belt that is used by most astrologers is fixed. And in actuality, there's been movement because of the Earth's something called the precession of the equinoxes. And so actually the zodiac signs have moved about, I think, 10 or 20 degrees back. And so you're actually probably not the zodiac sign that you think you are. At least a lot of people aren't. And we astrologers knew about this, but the way we viewed it was, well, this is the way the zodiac belt was when astrology was really being practiced and developed. And so it's still true. It's still true in that sense, even if it's not true actually, because when you're in the new age, so you can rationalize these things. You can say, well, it's true because that's the way it was when astrology was developed and everything. And so even though there's been this movement and it's not exactly accurate, it's still true, like symbolically, it still affects the person in this other way. And so that's how most of us would think. That's how I thought, because I knew about these things. I knew astronomers, hate astrologers, and they were always making fun of them. And I remember one time at the Astrological Society, they made an announcement. The local astronomical society, or one of them, or maybe somebody at Emory University, I don't know, invited, they sent an invitation to the Astrological Society. They said, we invite any one of your astrologers for a debate. And, we're like, oh yeah, those astronomers, they just want to debate all this science, and, our view is that science has this, they have this knowledge of the physical world, but they don't understand the spiritual world, and they don't understand the spiritual laws at work. So of course they reject astrology. They of course reject that because astrology is really very spiritual. Because if you believe the planet has a meaning, this planet Mars in your seventh house indicates, a lot of maybe egotism and a lot of conflict with a possible partner or with your partner. I'm giving a meaning to the planet Mars. I'm not just saying this is the size of Mars, this is the gases on Mars, or whatever the physical things are. I'm saying it's what it represents to you. So I'm giving this meaning, underlying meaning, which is really divination, which is condemned by God as well. So of course we're thinking, of course the astronomers, they don't understand. We just kind of wrote them off like they don't understand. Nobody ever did a debate. We just didn't think it was worthwhile. And we knew the astronomers would just crush us with all this factual stuff, and they wouldn't understand any of the spiritual stuff. So it was really kind of funny because this would happen every couple of years or so. Some astronomer would invite, one of us to come debate or something.
I should mention that storm that you were experiencing is coming here. I hope the internet doesn't get cut off.
It really wasn't. It was just a little wind and apparently some rain. I didn't hear any thunder.
Yes.
So
it's starting to.
Oh yeah.
So
it must have gone from here. I'm in Annandale. It must have gone from here. Where are you?
I'm in Woodbridge, so I'm about 30 minutes south of you. I'm not
You're
far.
south of me. It must be moving south. Yeah.
So but then now you said your spirit master, you were offering to give 2 instances, and then we'll continue on.
Okay, we'll continue on to how
you.
this all came to an end. No, I don't mind you interrupting because sometimes it's good. Sometimes if you want me to clarify something, please do so. Or if you have a question, because if you want me to clarify something, it could be people listening would have the same questions.
I think it's powerful. Okay, so I think, there's all this pseudoscientific stuff.
Yes.
But then there's this element that is demonic.
Yeah.
And it's easy, I was just like you were saying, you first started with these this guided meditation or whatever, and at the end they took you to your spirit master and just like, look, guys, it may look just like just quack stuff, but it will lead you to a very dark place.
Exactly. Yes, this is not just, there are people who are just quacks and con artists who are just doing it like kind of for the money, but there are people who are seriously into this like I was, and there's a spiritual component to it that is from the enemy. It's against God. And you are engaging in something that he has condemned, and it's very spiritual. And like you said, it may look on the surface like it's just a pseudoscience or it's this kind of quackery, but actually it's really a very dark practice, and it's got this spiritual element to it that's very dark, and it takes people to dark places, and it keeps them from Christ. So it's not something to like dismiss. It's very real. People have real experiences. And anyway, so these two things that happened were, one was I was doing a chart reading for a woman, and I was talking to her. I even remember where I was. For some reason, we were sitting outside in her backyard. It must have been a nice day. And I was talking to her, and I got to the chart about her maybe relationship with her mother. I can't remember why. And I said, I see that there might be something going on with your mother. For some reason, I saw this in the chart. I didn't always see things like this. And I said, there's going to be a change in your relationship in the next 3 months. And I said, it's going to be a very big change. And I didn't know what the change was going to be. I just said there was going to be a very big change. And then she talked a little bit about a relationship with her mother, which I think was kind of strained. And so it made her think, I guess, about that. So about a few months later, she called me, And she said, "Do you remember when you told me there would be a big change in my relationship with my mother?" And I said, "Yeah, I do remember telling you that." And she said, "Well," she said, my relationship wasn't very good." And she said, "So I decided to try to, you know, mend fences with her." And she died very suddenly in the time period you said there would be a big change.
Wow.
So, yeah. um, Now I didn't know, I did not tell her her mother would die. In fact, you're not supposed to tell people anything about that, because actually in the chart, in astrology, death can show up as a good thing. And from the astrological viewpoint, it can be freedom. It can be freedom. So it can show up as with Jupiter, which is usually considered a rather beneficial planet. It's sort of the planet of freedom, even though Pluto is technically the planet of death. So I never said anything, but I did see what I told her would be a change. And so she said that was it. And she said, "I'm glad you told me that, because, then I spent time with my mother." So it turned out to be a good thing for her. But you see how that gives credibility to astrology. And she took my words about the big change to be signifying the death of her mother. So the client will hear one thing, and then something will happen, and they'll apply it to that specific situation, even though the astrologer did not give a specific statement. So that's another way it seems to work. Now, the other thing that happened was very much in the moment kind of thing. I was doing a chart. Now, this was for actually someone I knew. I didn't know him super well, but I knew him I knew him kind of well. He was a friend of my husband's at the time. And, but I didn't really know about that much about his life or what was going on. I didn't see him that often. And I gotten to the end of his chart, and I told him that I felt his chart was indicating he needed to do something really different. I said, "You really need to do something out of the box." And then as I said that, in my mind, I had a picture of him skydiving. And it was very vivid. And I said, "Maybe you should take some skydiving lessons." And he looked at me with a shocked look on his face. He said, "Are you kidding?" He said, how do you know I signed up for skydiving lessons?" I said, "I don't know that." I said, "I just saw you skydiving." He said, "I signed up for skydiving lessons the other day, like
Wow.
2 days earlier." I did not know that. I swear I didn't know that. He was like shocked. I was like very pleased. I thought, yep, well, there it is. I knew that doing astrology gave me some psychic powers, and that's what I considered to have been a psychic
Well,
power.
there was a lot of that in our household, psychic stuff. And it's difficult for me to talk about it, but my mother was also a fortune teller. She
Oh,
practiced it, and she quit for a
uh,
while because one time she was doing fortune telling. She said, I see that your marriage is going to break up.
oh,
And, and, and really strange set of I don't remember all the details, but it was so frightening. She
wow,
quit.
wow, really?
Yeah. Um, it had to do with, I mean, it seemed like it was a happy marriage, but then there was something with like a plague or something, and the two got separated, and that led to, it just seemed, she said she never wanted to do it again because she didn't want to tell bad fortunes anymore.
Oh,
And then she was very, very psychic herself. I mean, she could just read people. Um,
yeah.
she said, "I didn't like the way that girl held her purse. I think she has financial problems." I'm like, "How did you know that?" "I do know that. I do know
She
that."
would just know. She would just know.
Oh,
Yeah.
it was uncanny. And
Yeah.
she'd look at someone and say, "He's a rapist," and Dad would go like, "Come on, no way you could." Of course, that would come out. she
Yeah,
would
see,
just,
that was probably her spirit guides were probably giving her that information.
well, then she
When she did
started,
fortune telling, she had spirit guides.
she started practicing, she got involved in this thing called Astara. Okay, there are all these
Okay.
obscure California cults. All right, so
Yes, yeah. Oh, there's obscure cults all over the United States. Yeah, there's
I'm sorry to
thousands of
laugh,
them.
but that's California. Okay, so,
Yeah.
but I thank God, I'm not Catholic, and I certainly don't have their theology, but a Catholic priest had a Bible study at our house, took her through the Bible, and oh my goodness, so many, I could just feel the spirit lift out of the house. It got
Wow.
her because she was reading the Bible, and
She
then
was reading the Bible. Yeah.
her last years with me, I was reading the Bible to her. Didn't matter if we understood it, and there were a lot of passages in the Old Testament we had no clue, but I would read it to her. And I just felt something very good in the house. I myself was not psychic, but I had some telekinetic ability. That all went away when I became a Christian. I'm just like, yeah,
Yeah.
power didn't come from me. So, uh,
Yeah.
it's so hard for me to talk about it because it's such a dark. There's just like something really
Yeah.
dark. I just like, so now, when I read the New Testament, some people will um just brush it off. They said that's not real. But then when I talk about it, some other people that hear me, it's like, yeah, Sal, I didn't want to talk about it too, but there's that aspect of my life too. And suddenly more people started coming forward and saying, yeah, I didn't want to talk about it too, but yeah, I see that other realm. And so thank you for sharing that. I mean, normally this particular channel focuses on the creation evolution controversy, archaeology, and Christian testimony. And yours is a Christian testimony, but it has this component that I think people need to hear because there are, I mentioned Alien Intrusion, which is my favorite creationist work. It says, a lot of people in the church just don't want to talk about possible demonic influences, and this is the place you should talk about it. You should seek prayer. You shouldn't, yeah, it may be embarrassing, but you shouldn't hesitate to ask for prayer and invite the Lord in your life and the Lord's protection.
Yeah, I think it's good to be aware of it, to know it's there, not to focus on it. Unfortunately, in some churches, they focus on it, and that's not good. Because Christ is stronger, and actually he's defeated Satan. Satan is a defeated enemy that God is still allowing to operate in limited ways. But for the Christian's under the authority of Christ. I had spontaneous experiences like that where I knew things about people, not strangers, but well, in one case it was a stranger. One case it was someone I had never met, but my husband and I were going to visit a married couple, and had known the guy in college. He didn't know the wife. I hadn't met either one of them. We went up to New Jersey where they lived, and we were staying at their apartment. And when we walked in the door, and she and her husband were standing there, I knew right away she was pregnant, even though she wasn't showing. And I knew she was pregnant. I didn't say anything because I thought they would think it was weird, because they would be like, how do you know? And a few, like 5 or 10 minutes later, as we were getting settled in, the husband mentioned, oh yeah, we just found out, Mary's, expecting, we're going to have a child in blah, 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 such and such month. And I was like, I knew it. And another time, now this happened after I was a Christian, and I had a few things like this happen after I was a Christian. So I asked God to take it away, and he did. Yeah. And that's what I tell people: if they've been in this area and they become a Christian and then they still have these things happening, you ask God to remove it. But see, you have to want it to be removed. Sometimes people are attached to it. That's the problem. I've come across that too. But it happened, I was going to these Bible studies near where I was working. I was a brand new believer. And we had this man who would come teach them. He came from a church that was a little ways away, maybe, maybe 15 miles or something outside of Atlanta. And one day it was supposed to be time to start and he wasn't there. And everyone's kind of looking around like, this was like on our lunch hour. So it's like, well, where is he? Where's Bob or whatever his name is? And right away, I knew that he had his car had broken down. Now I know that that's a scenario that a lot of people might think, well, maybe his car broke down, but I didn't think of it in that way. It's like I knew that's what had happened. I knew it. And so a few minutes later, he came in and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I was on highway blah blah, and my car broke down." And I was like, I knew it. I knew it. It just came into my head out of the blue. And I had some other, now I was a Christian then. So I asked God because I didn't like it. I didn't like that happened. When he came in and went up there, I thought he's going to tell us his car broke down. And he said, "I'm sorry, my car broke down." And I said, "God, I don't like this. Please don't let me do this. Please take this away from me." And he did. He did take it away from me. So that's what I tell people. But I had several instances like that before I was a Christian too. So I'll move on though from that because I don't want to focus on it, but you want to let people know these things happen. And that's one reason people are into this stuff, because they see this stuff happening and they're like, this is real. I can really tell things. And then they think it's good. They think it's a good power to have. But it's not
So,
good.
I totally derailed where we were just kind of giving a biography of
Yes,
so you're doing astrology. It was starting to
I'm doing
prosper,
astrology, doing
and
my
then
meditation. Yeah,
okay,
I'm in the Astrological Society. I become president of the Astrological Society. I'm on the board of
wow,
astrology examiners, the board I told you about that gave the exam. I got on the board and I was on it for 4 years, and I was chairperson the last 3 of those 4 years. And I was president of the Astrological Society. I was on the speakers bureau. I would go around and speak to groups. I spoke to Parents Without Partners about astrology. I spoke at the Lions Club about astrology. I was very, very active, and I was writing. Meanwhile, I was writing for astrological and New Age journals. So I was extremely active. And so what happened was, in the midst of all this activity and my position at the Astrological Society, I started getting this compulsion to go to a church just out of the blue. This was not like the psychic things I talked about, because this wasn't like knowing something or seeing something about somebody. This was like this compulsion, like I need to go to a church. But I didn't want to go to one. It was a compulsion that was external to me. And I thought, well, that's so strange. Why do I feel like I should go to a church? So I just kind of ignored it. But it went on. It started in the spring, like maybe around April. And it went on, into the summer. So the summer came, and in August I went to an astrological conference where I spoke. And I was around by astrologers, New Agers, Wiccans. I was around all kinds of people there. A few strange things happened there that I won't go into because it's going to make the story too long, but a few odd things happened there. I came back to Atlanta, and I guess I thought that maybe that compulsion would be gone, but it wasn't. It was still there. And I thought, yeah, I didn't have it when I was at the conference. I was in Oregon, so it's far away. Came back to Atlanta. I was like, okay, it hasn't gone away. Maybe it's from a past life, because I believed I had past lives. I believed in reincarnation. It's probably from one of my past lives as a Christian, and it's probably something unresolved that I need to resolve. And the only way I can resolve it is by going into a church. So that's how I justified it to myself.
when you were in McLean, I think you said maybe you were a past life as a monk.
Yes, I thought maybe as a monk or, yes, I did think that maybe I was a monk or something like that. And this is something that has to be resolved. So I went to this large church in downtown
How
Atlanta.
did you feel about Christians? I remember you said you didn't
Oh,
like.
yes. I thought Christians were, well, I thought they were on a lower path of spiritual evolution. I thought they were, they were thinking, they were very narrow because they thought that you had to believe a certain thing, and they thought you had to believe this book, the Bible. And I thought that they were told what to believe by the preachers, pretty much. I thought they didn't really think for themselves. And that's how I saw Christians. So I thought they were very narrow in their thinking and very limited, and they didn't understand that we're all on this spiritual path for many lives. Eventually they would get to that point, but they weren't there yet. It would be a future lifetime. So that's how I saw them. And that's, most New Agers kind of have that condescending attitude towards Christians. It's sad, but they wouldn't admit that they're condescending, but they really are. It's very elitist. So so there I was going to a church. So that was, for me, of course, that was kind of a maybe kind of humbling to me, because I didn't believe in going to church. So I'd gone to church for a funeral, but that was different. I'm like, this, I don't really want to go here. So I went in and I sat in the back. So because my plan was, I'm going to leave in about 15 or 20 minutes. So I'm going to just quietly leave from the back. Nobody will notice. I'll just go out the door and that'll be it. I will have done it. So I'm sitting there, and the service starts, and everybody stands up, and they're playing music, and they have a procession from the back of the church. And this is a procession of the minister, and I don't know if they're choir members or not. I usually say the choir, but I'm not sure. But it was ministers, and led by this boy carrying a cross. And as he walks by me, I feel what I call a waterfall of love coming down on me. It's very strong, and I know it's coming from a personal God who loves me. And I just don't really, I can't really process it. I don't really know what's going on. But I feel this love, and I started very quietly crying, and I just stood there with tears and didn't know what to think. So I stayed for the whole service. Then I decided that I would go back, because I thought, I know that's not going to happen again, but I'm just going to go back there, because that's where that happened. And I guess I was curious. And so I went back to the church. And then I just kept going every Sunday. I can't really say why, but I just was going every Sunday. I went to a Sunday school class even. And then I met a woman who had been Catholic, but she wanted to be a priest. And of course, you can't be a priest in the Catholic Church if you're a woman, but you can be a priest in the Episcopal Church if you're a woman. And so she switched over to the Episcopal Church. So she was in the Episcopal Church so she could become a priest eventually. And she was in a class of adults who were planning to be confirmed at Easter, or maybe on Palm Sunday, rather, in the Episcopal Church. And it was this class that was meeting with the rector. And the rector is kind of like the minister of the church in the Episcopal Church. So I didn't know all this language because I had no familiarity with the Episcopal Church at all. I had zero familiarity with it. My background was more the Baptist and those generic churches I went to. So she told me about this group that was meeting, and she said, you should come. And I remember what I said to her, and I said, well, I'm not really a Christian, though. I said, I'm more of a Buddhist. I said, maybe I'm a Buddhist Christian. And she said, oh, well, she said, Buddhism and Christianity are compatible. And I said, yeah, I know that. Such a funny conversation to think about now. And she's like, yeah, but they're compatible. And I said, yeah, okay. So she's like telling me, yeah, it's okay to come. Even if you think you're kind of a Buddhist, you can come. So because, she'd kind of become really my only friend there, and I wanted to meet other people, I started going to this group. And we would meet, and the rector would take us through the Book of Common, something in the Book of Common Prayer. He would read a scripture, and then we would sometimes read something else. Then he would talk a little bit. And I would just sit there and I was listening to him. I didn't really understand. We were going through the Gospel of Mark, actually. And I didn't really understand what he was talking about, but it kind of intrigued me. And I just kept going. And I kept going to the services. And I noticed during the service that when they would say the Lord Jesus Christ, that it had this effect on me. And I don't know how to describe it. It just had this effect on me, the Lord Jesus Christ. And there was something about it that just kind of grabbed me. And I just noticed it. It was something I noticed. So within a very short period of time, the Sunday I went into the church for the first time was Labor Day weekend. Now we're getting into October, so it's not that much later. It's maybe we're about 6 weeks later into the middle of October, and I start getting this impression that I believed was coming from this God who loved me, that he did not like astrology. So this was a very strong impression, and I sort of ignored it, like the compulsion to go to a church. I just thought I'm just going to ignore it because I don't really believe, how could God not like astrology? Because I'm helping people. But it just wouldn't go away. And then it turned into an impression that God was telling me to give it up. Basically, I felt God was telling me, you have to stop doing astrology. Now, I didn't hear a voice or anything. It was this impression. Now as I look back on it as a Christian, I think this was the Holy Spirit. And, clearly the Holy Spirit was working on me, not in me, but on me. The Holy Spirit was working and convicting me. Astrology is bad. You have to give it up.
If I may ask, did some of the people at that church, weren't they asking you for astrological advice?
Yes, I forgot to mention that. Some people had asked for my business card when I told them I was an astrologer. So I thought, I can get more clients here. And that was one reason. After I first went, the first few weeks, when I started meeting people and telling them I was an astrologer and gave them my business card, I thought, I can get more clients here. So that was one way I kept going to the church. It's very interesting how God organizes things. If I had gone to a church that was more conservative and told somebody I was an astrologer, they would have said, let me show you the scriptures on that. Or, do you know that astrology is wrong? And I would have been like, well, goodbye. I would have just left. I would have never gone back.
That's what is so incredible about this.
I know. It's incredible. The way God's timing in this, when I look back, is just amazes me. And so here I am in this kind of open-minded Episcopal church, and people aren't telling me, oh, astrology is terrible. I'm thinking they might become a client. So I'm like, I'm just going to keep coming. I can get some clients here. Then the Holy Spirit starts working on me, see? And now I feel like I'm supposed to give astrology up. So I didn't like this at all. This was not a go for me. And I just tried to resist it, but this was very hard to resist. This was even harder to resist than the compulsion to go to a church. And so finally I decided the night before Thanksgiving. So now we're, Labor Day to the night before Thanksgiving, kind of the end of November. I decide, okay, I'm going to give it up because I can't take any more of this. It's like, I can't fight it anymore. So I actually give it up. It was very strange because my clients would call me to make an appointment and I would say, I'm not doing astrology anymore. And sometimes they would just say, okay, do you have somebody you can recommend? But sometimes they would say, why? Why not? And so sometimes I just said, I don't know. But some people who call me that I knew a little better, who I had been clients, I had returning clients. I didn't see people just one time. They would come back for at least once a year to get the chart updated, where you look at conditions now, or they might come back for a relationship chart. So I had returning clients. And so some of these people I knew a little bit from that, and they would say, well, why not? Why do you not want to do astrology anymore? And I'd say, well, somehow it's separating me from God. And they would say, well, how's it separating you from God? And I would say, I don't know. It just is. That was
Wow.
I didn't know. And so they didn't know what to say, and I didn't know what to say. So that was the end of the conversation.
And if I may ask, I'm presuming at that point you really hadn't read many scriptures about.
Oh no. I
You
had
didn't even
read
know about
books
the
back then.
scriptures about the astrologers or anything.
I had a general idea that Christianity and astrology were not compatible. I kind of knew that. I kind
Okay.
of knew that just from general knowledge and maybe things I had observed. Um, I think I knew that, but yet I still thought I was helping people. So I didn't understand why God would ask me to stop. I didn't think in terms of, I don't think it's really biblical, because I didn't really think in terms of the Bible as God's word. I
It
just had
makes
this general view that it didn't go together. But then I wasn't sure because some people in the church wanted my card. And actually, when I was an astrologer, I ended up talking to a Methodist Sunday school class. I was invited by a Methodist Sunday school class to come talk about astrology.
See,
So,
yeah,
in my mind, I thought maybe they don't really go together, but maybe they can go together. I'm not sure, but I think maybe I was thinking that way.
see, I was raised in the Catholic Church, and I found, okay, I, I didn't see any problem with it,
Yeah,
but um, I think like you, uh, just kind of out of the blue, it just God just kind of draws you when you don't expect, and then
right.
God
Well,
will
if
keep
you know,
prompting
if
you.
you know the scriptures, then it's wrong,
Yeah,
because it isn't now the
but
word astrology isn't in Hebrew. There's no Hebrew word for astrology, but it describes astrology other ways, like prognostication by the heavens, worship of the host of heaven, plotting out. There's a word, plotting out the sky, like you're dividing up the sky. That's what the astrologers did to do their interpretations. They would divide up the sky by correlating to the constellations or whatever. And so there's a Hebrew term for dividing up the sky that's interpreted as doing astrology.
but the thing that strikes me is that
I mean,
you just had
translated.
you had this you had two intense compulsions, one to go to church
Yes. Yeah.
and then to give up astrology. It just hit
Yeah.
you hard, and you couldn't.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
That's
I obey. I followed up on it. I gave it up, and it was like, now I think I had two or three more people whose charts I'd already agreed to do. So I did their charts in early December. I tried to say as little as possible when I was doing the chart, which was very hard because I didn't think that God wanted me to do it, but I felt I was obligated to these people. Now, I should have probably refunded them, but I didn't do that. And remember, now I'm still not a Christian. I'm not a Christian. So I really don't understand everything. So I did their charts. I mean, and I didn't take on any more new clients. I just did these three people that I already agreed to do their charts. And so there I am, not a Christian, not an astrologer. So what am I? I didn't know what I was. So I thought, I guess I'm going to read the Bible because I'm going to church and I'm not doing astrology. So I decided I'll start with the New Testament. I don't want to read the Old Testament, which was a mystery to me. I'll read the New Testament and I'll start with the first book, Matthew, chapter 1, verse 1. So I just started reading. I'm reading a little bit every night. I'm reading Matthew. I don't really understand the import of anything that I'm reading. But the one thing that really got my attention is that the words seemed very pure to me. They just were pure. There's something pure. And that was the word that came to me, was pure, which is not a word I use very often at all. And certainly as a new ager, I don't know if hardly I ever use that word, especially talking about words. I don't think I'd ever use that word of words. But I thought these words are like pure. And I was thinking, I've never read a book where the words were like that. There's something different in this book. And so I'm reading a little bit, partly because of that. There was something very compelling about the words in the Bible. And then I finally make it shortly before Christmas to Matthew chapter 8. And I'm reading a passage in Matthew 8 And the passages where Jesus is on the boat with some of his disciples and there's a storm and they're scared, and he knows they're scared. They tell him they're scared. They think they're gonna drown. They think the ship's gonna drown, wreck or drown. And Jesus gets up and rebukes the sea and the wind, and it immediately stops. The storm stops. And they're thinking, it says now this is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There's three of the three synoptic gospels all record this account. And I was reading the one in Matthew. Now I've read it I think the longest one is in Mark, and then in Luke, it might be shorter. I can't remember. I've read all three of them. So I may be remembering wrong what's in Matthew, but they're thinking, the disciples said, "What manner of man is this that even the sea and the winds obey him?" Who is this man? They still didn't totally understand who Jesus was at that point. And something about this account really struck me, and I just kept reading it over and over again. And as I was rereading it, God opened my eyes. And that's when, the truth just flooded in. I saw who Jesus was. I realized why he died on the cross. Of course, I knew the story of Jesus dying on the cross from having gone to church when I was younger. I understood why he died on the cross. I understood I had been separated from God, and I had been going against God my whole life, that all my beliefs were wrong, and that I needed Jesus. I realized I need Jesus. And so I immediately turned my life over to Jesus. And at that moment, I knew I was a different person. It was very clear to me. I knew I was different. Basically, I was born again. It's what it was. And everything changed. I mean, my whole world changed 180 degrees. I realized I was a Christian. I realized Christ had saved me. I also realized that if I had died before that moment, I would have gone to hell, and I would have been separated from God eternally. And so this, of course, was to say it was life-changing is an understatement. It's a big understatement. It took me, I knew what happened. It took me a little while to process this. And I immediately wanted to read the Bible. I wanted to read Christian books. I wanted to hear Christian teachers. And I didn't have anybody really to guide me. So I was working. This is part of what happened to me, is I was working part-time for a client in his office. And I was secretly giving him information on the employees based on their birth data. That's why I was there. He had hired me about a year earlier. And I was there. Now, of course, I knew I couldn't keep doing this. But he wasn't there because he was on this leave. He had taken this 2-month leave for whatever reason from Thanksgiving to early January. Now, this is around Christmas time. So he's not there. I can't go tell him I'm not doing astrology anymore. So I'm still in the office. He'd given me busy work. So I'm just doing this regular office work. And I don't really know what to do. I don't have anyone to talk to. There was in this office a young Christian man, and I knew he was a Christian. It was very clear from things he said. He had been very nice to me and talked to me and asked me questions about what I thought about different things. And I liked that. I liked that he wanted my opinion. So I would always tell him, what I thought of something. And he never tried to tell me anything about, I'm not saying you shouldn't witness, but he didn't try to quote unquote witness to me, probably because the Holy Spirit was guiding him. And it wasn't,
Yes.
it wouldn't have helped. It would have driven me away. And the Holy Spirit was working on me already. So God had this young man praying for me with a young adult fellowship at his church, but I didn't find that out till April. So in January, my boss comes back. I tell him I can't do the astrology anymore. I'm not doing it anymore. Now, my boss was a member of a Methodist church. by the way, but he was one of my clients and also was a student in my astrology class. So there you go. So I told him I couldn't do astrology anymore. I can't remember how I explained it to him. He was very nice. He said he would just give me other regular work. I was a single mother at the time, and maybe that's why he did that. I don't know. But, it was compassionate of him, and I'm grateful to him for that. And so I stayed on and I was doing this regular busy work. And then in April, this young man walks into my office, and I had already gone and told him in January I'd become a Christian. I think it was in January because I think he was gone over Christmas too. And he didn't say anything. I don't remember what he said. I just remember him kind of smiling, but I don't remember him saying anything. Now it's April. He's coming into my office, and I said, I can't believe that just a few months ago I was an astrologer and now I'm a Christian. And I didn't even want to be a Christian. And I said, and now I am one. And he kind of smiled and he said, well, maybe somebody was praying for you. And I said, no. I said, I can't think of anybody who would pray for me. And then I looked at him and I said, wait a minute, were you praying for me? And that's when I found out he had been praying with his young adult fellowship group at his church, which ironically enough was also a Methodist church. So my boss, the Methodist, was an astrology client and student. And then this young man's a Methodist, but he's praying with his young adult fellowship group. Very different types of maybe Methodist churches or different types of Methodists. But anyway, yeah, they were praying for me. So God was working behind the scenes. He was praying all that year when all that compulsion to go to church was going on. He didn't know that was going on. He didn't know I went to a church. He didn't know I had that experience. He didn't know that I gave astrology up. He didn't know that I started reading the Bible. He didn't know any of that. He was just praying because God apparently burdened him to pray for me.
And those compulsions came around the time
he was praying. Yeah, they were praying for me. He told me, he said, we prayed for you all last year, Marcia. And I don't remember eventually he knew what happened because he invited me to come give my story to the group that prayed for me. And I did. So I got to meet them. And I went there, and when they usually met, which I think was like on a Tuesday evening, and it was south of Atlanta. It was kind of a little ways out. But I went there and met everybody and thanked them for praying for me. And I told them what happened. So then they found out about the compulsion to go to church and everything. Yeah.
Now, I recall a little bit of your story too. There was an aftermath with your
spirit guide. Yes. I don't always tell that, but I should, because a lot of people say, well, what happened to the spirit guide? Yes, this happened about, this was right around Easter. So now the day I trusted Christ, when I was born again, I happen to know the day. It was December 21st. So it was 4 days before Christmas. And now we're into Easter. And I can't remember when Easter was the following year. I don't know if it was late March or early April. I think it was a little early that year. I'm not sure. But yeah, what happened was I had left the Episcopal Church because the rector that had been there that had talked to me. Oh, I didn't go into that. I had gone in and talked to him, and I didn't tell that part of my story, but he had left and there was another person there. And I had an experience that I usually don't have time to tell, so I'm not going to tell it, but I went on a retreat, and that experience on that retreat showed me, I believed God was telling me I had to leave that church. I wasn't getting spiritually fed there. So I went to another church, which was better. Still wasn't a great church, but it was better. And I decided to join that church. And so the day I was going to join, I walked forward so the minister could, welcome me. I wanted to be baptized, but he didn't want to baptize me because I actually had been baptized when I was 11 because my mother had arranged it. And it had just been this very outward thing. I didn't really understand it at all, and I shouldn't have been baptized because I wasn't a believer, but I was baptized. And so there's a story behind that I won't go into. So this minister who was with the disciples of Christ, they're very strict about baptism. And if you've been baptized, even if you weren't a believer, they won't baptize you as a believer. So they take that one baptism thing literally, but that's actually talking about baptism by the Holy Spirit. It's when you're born again. It's not water baptism, but that's not their thinking. So, so I was going to join the church. But as I was sitting there waiting for him to, call me forward or call people forward who wanted to join the church, I started getting really feeling bad. I just started feeling bad, feeling kind of dizzy, just not feeling well. But I did go up front and I did officially join the church. And he did ask me questions like they ask you, are you turning, kind of like the questions they ask sometimes when they baptize you. Are you turning your back on the devil? Are you putting your trust in Christ? He asked me those questions. So I was publicly announcing, it was really the first public announcement of my faith. And after lunch, I went home and I was feeling worse. It was really a strange kind of illness. And I really, I don't know if it was from the Lord or if it was demonic, but it was a very strange kind of illness because I don't even know how to categorize it. I was lying down on the bed. I felt so bad. And I was in my bedroom, and I looked around. I thought I saw things moving. And I thought, what is going on here? And then there was this presence there. I couldn't see anything, but it was very real to me. I knew that my spirit guide was standing in the room, my main spirit guide, and the one that was called the spiritual master. I knew he was angry at me and hated me. And in my mind, I thought he had made me sick. That's how I interpreted it. And I said, I don't care how sick you make me. Even if you kill me, I'm just going to go be with Jesus. And immediately, it's like, I don't want anything to do with you anymore. Immediately, he was gone. Immediately. Bang, just like that. And I knew he was gone because that presence there was, like I said, even though I couldn't see it, I could sense it, I could feel it. I knew he was there. This anger and hostility and hatred towards me was incredible. But it was gone. And then it was like, wow, and then later I thought about it and I realized that God probably allowed that because he wanted me to realize I had to cut ties with the spirit guide. He wanted me to realize who that spirit guide was. He wanted me to see who that was. I had kind of forgotten about the spirit guide. See, he had kind of forgotten about him. I think God was like, you need to know who this was. And so I think, I don't know. I'm not trying to speak for God. I'm just guessing, but I'm guessing that's why God allowed it. It makes sense to me,
Yes.
and then I saw who this really was. I saw that he hated me, that he hated Christ. He hated that I had become a Christian and that, I had to recognize that. Now, I do not believe in talking to demons. I do want to say that because I don't want anyone to take that as an endorsement of talking to demons.
I agree.
I don't think it's scriptural. Yeah.
I don't think it's scriptural.
I think that, it's Jesus and the disciples did it, but Jesus gave that power to the disciples to cast out demons. He gave them that power. It's specifically in there. It says he gave them the power to cast out demons and heal the sick. So, to make the lame walk, make the blind see, he gave them that power. Of course, he can do that because he's God. So, Jesus, that's no question about Jesus doing that. But there's nothing in the New Testament letters. There's nothing letters to the churches about casting demons out. There's no ritual to follow. There's nothing about Christians having demons and needing demons to be cast out. So I am very sketchy on the whole thing of the demon thing and demon possession. I think that it does exist, but I think a lot of times it's what's happening. The person is even mentally ill or something, and it's misinterpreted. And that's another area I don't want to get into because it's too there's too much, it's too complicated, and I'm not an expert on it. But I want to say that because I did speak to this spirit guide, but I think because he had been my spirit guide, it was in a way necessary for me to say something to him. Not necessary for him to leave. I think Christ took him away. I didn't send him away. Christ took him away.
Well, my feeling on some of this is the reason we don't hear, obviously in the New Testament, there was a lot of phenomenon that was demonic. But because I think there's so many Christian churches in the United States, even though they're in decline right now, I think people don't realize how blessed we are, because we don't have that phenomenon, because there were a lot of good churches, and there still are, and there's still a lot of good people, even though Christianity on the whole is in decline. I did want to ask you one pointed question that I recall from, I think when you spoke at McLean, you did have a vision once that was really scary. Some woman appeared.
Oh yes, I had a few of them. Yeah, this was before, of course, I was saved. This was probably about 1.5 or 2 years before I was saved. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I don't know why I woke up, but I think it's because I sensed a presence in the room. And it's the same room where I was saved, and it's the same room where my spirit guide appeared to me. Or not appeared to me, but where, that whole encounter happened. And I saw a woman sitting at the bottom of my bed, an old woman. Now I knew she was not flesh and blood. I knew that. And I didn't think ghost. I just thought she's some entity from another dimension. Because I guess I didn't think she was a dead person for whatever reason. I guess because I didn't recognize her. I thought, well, if a dead person's going to appear to me, it'd probably be somebody I know. I don't know. I didn't even think that way. So I just saw this entity sitting there, and she was speaking to me, but in her mind. She wasn't speaking words, and I could hear her in my mind, and she was saying, I'm here to take your body. I'm going to take over your body. And I have to tell you, I was terrified. So in my mind, I'm answering her, and I'm saying, no, you can't have my body. And she said, yes, I'm here to take your body. And I said, no, you can't have my body. Now I was awake. This was not a dream. I was awake. I'm very clear on when I'm awake and when I'm asleep, because I do have dreams, and I've had a lot of bad dreams. This was an awake experience. And we went back like that. I don't know how long, back and forth a little bit. And I began trembling, and I was perspiring all over my body. I was probably one of the most terrifying moments of my life, I would say, because I thought maybe she could take over my body. And then in my mind, well, I would be dead. I mean, where would I be? I wasn't ready to die, and so this went back and forth, and then she finally just faded. She just kind of faded away. And I just lay there for a long time, for a really long time. I could not sleep, so terrified. I didn't know how to process that. The only way I could think of it was this was some, dark entity, that's really confused and negative, because I didn't really believe in evil. So it's a really confused entity that thinks, it wants my body, and they're trying to get my body, and I was just so relieved that she went, so, I mean, I think that was obviously a demon. I don't know, was the demon trying to possess me? Maybe. But if that's the case, God didn't allow it. God did not allow it, because he's merciful. And maybe because, he was going to save me. I don't know. But, it didn't happen. Nothing happened except that I was terrified, very terrified.
Well, sometimes I hear this account a few times. It's sometimes when someone is kind of the darkest point spiritually, that's sometimes when God's you're getting prepared to be brought back to the light. It's kind of like little bit.
maybe,
I mean, I'm just, as
maybe.
I've talked to, it's not always
Yeah,
the case,
yeah.
but
I mean, yeah, but
it-
it can be. Yes, it can be the case. Yeah. And it can be, yes. And I don't know. It was like I say, I think it was about a year and a half, maybe. I'd have to go back and think about it more. It was not more than 2 years before I was saved, and maybe more like a year and a half.
well, well, I thank you for correcting me that it can be, because it's not always, you know,
Yeah,
that way. I knew it was that way in my life. It got
yeah,
dark spiritually right when it was going to turn. And
uh-huh.
then the contrast
Some
was so
people though,
strong.
yeah, well, some people stay there though. They stay in the
Yes,
darkness or they kill themselves. Unfortunately, this is,
yes, yes.
something that happens in people who get into the new age and the occult or
Well,
other false teachings.
uh,
Yeah.
I mean, that's why you saw that shocked look on my face when you said Naropa University, and she was a beautiful girl, and they said she got into that, and
There was an article in, wasn't it like in the Atlantic or something like that, that gave the whole story. Is that how you know about it? How do you
I
know
saw
about
it
it?
on the History Channel, and the History Channel is getting very
Oh,
new agey itself, unfortunately.
yeah,
And they're talking
yeah.
about all these mysteries, and they're saying
Oh, they had that story on there. Really?
yeah, and that's how I found. I'm just like, my heart was just, oh, it was just heart
I
wrenching.
know. No, it really got to me because I read the article was very detailed. And I know her parents tried to intervene and get her, get her to stop. She was with that man who was teaching that dancing, and
Yes,
she was kind of his partner and under his spell, so to speak. He had
yes.
this power over her. And yeah, what she was doing was very dark, and it's considered a very dark form of art. It's considered kind of a dark art.
It's very dark. It's
Yeah.
just like, how can you not see it? There's no beauty in it. It's just darkness, and it
She
creeps
was
me out.
drawn to it for whatever reason. And yeah, it destroyed her. And I read that article. It had a very strong effect on me. I guess I read it maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years ago. I'm not sure. I'm going to try to find it again. What was her name again? Because I'd forgotten her name.
I think it's
Susan. I think you said
I think it's
Susan
Sharon
Stern.
Stern, but I'm
Sharon
gonna just
Stern.
verify that
Yeah.
right now before I start to talk a little bit. As we close, uh,
Yeah.
I'm gonna help advertise. I think you wrote a couple books, and they're on Am.
Okay.
Yeah, her
Okay.
name is Sharon Stern. Arrived at
Okay.
Naropa.
I'm gonna look it up. I'll probably find that article. I'll
Uh,
send it to you if you want it.
oh, I actually I've read enough of it. I don't want to.
Okay, you don't need it. You don't need it. You already know the
So
story.
yeah, it's called The Unraveling of a Dancer.
Oh yeah.
New
Okay.
Yorker, The Atlantic.
Oh yeah.
This beautiful girl just went totally
It was
downhill.
in the New Yorker. Yeah, I said the Atlantic, but it was in the New Yorker. That's where I read
Um,
it. Yeah.
and you know, um, I began. It's kind of like what you said. There are days I've been very bored at church, but then there was sometimes you get the feeling something pure is there, and I did find really amazing. Even in that church that you left, that Episcopal church that you said wasn't feeding you spiritually, it was still the right place where
It was the right place for
that
me. And
boy
God,
holding that cross, and you felt the love of
yeah.
God just pour.
Plus
And
hearing Lord Jesus Christ and some of the scriptures I heard, I think God used those. I think
yes,
God used that. So he used the rector there too when I went to go talk to him. And I I didn't get that part in, but he kind of confirmed. I told him that I was feeling God was wanting me to give astrology up. And he started reading scriptures in the Old Testament about divination and reading, he said, well, they used to like read the liver of animals. And I was like, what is he talking about? He's talking about that's the way they were doing divination. One of the ways they did divination then was looking at the liver of animals, and
yeah,
because they thought the liver was like a special part of your body. It's like where your whole soul was or something. So, he said he was reading this, and I thought, well, I don't totally understand, but I think it's confirmation. I should give it up. So yeah, he still used people and things at that church. So, God can do that. He can do things like that. So We probably should
and
wrap it up because I think maybe my voice is going to give out soon.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Before we get to the book, curiosity is going to kill the cat. It might kill your voice, but if you can't,
What?
that's
No,
fine.
go ahead. Go ahead.
So when you're getting this intense compulsion to go to church, of course, people were praying for you. You said there was an incident. You went to a conference where even there were
Oh,
Wicca, and you said there.
a couple, yeah, actually, a couple of things happened. One of them was went to a workshop that a friend of mine was doing. I had, some of the people I knew there were fellow writers for a magazine, a New Age magazine I wrote for. The conference was put on by the publisher of the magazine, and he invited writers to be his speakers and other people. So a lot of us were fellow writers for this magazine, and I had been at a previous conference there 2 years earlier and had met some people, and some of the same people were back. So some of them I knew a little bit. And I went to her workshop, and she was talking about, her workshop was on the age of Aquarius. And so she was up there talking about the age of Aquarius, and I started getting really irritated. And I was really irritated. And I kept thinking, oh, the age of Aquarius, everybody thinks it's so great. Well, not everything is great about Aquarius. There's a negative. I'm thinking this stuff. I think I may have even raised my hand and said something, but in a very polite way. But I was getting very irritated, and that whole thing of me being irritated like that was not like me. That was very unlike me. But the other thing that happened was even stranger. That wasn't really strange. It was strange to me, but it doesn't sound that strange. But the other one really was strange. I was eating at lunch. We had lunch there. The conference was in a hotel, and we had lunch in the big room there that they had for us, and a catered lunch. And I was at a table with about, gosh, there was at least 6 of us, 6 or maybe 8 women. A few of them were into like Wicca and witchcraft. A few were astrologers. A few were just New Agers. And someone was talking about karma, which I believed in. And they were talking about karma. I don't remember what they were saying. And I started getting irritated at that. And finally, just out of the blue, I didn't even realize I was saying it till I said it. I said, maybe she was talking about the law of karma. I said, oh, the law of karma. I said, oh, the law of karma, 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 karma. What about the law of grace?
Whoa.
And everyone just stopped. I still can't believe I said that. And everyone just stopped and looked at me. I mean, no one said anything. And it was just this moment where everyone kind of froze, including me, because I'm thinking, what did I just say? And why did I say that? And then one of the women kind of said, well, yes, there's always that. And then they just kind of went on like nothing happened. So bizarre. It was so strange.
The Lord was beginning to put the words.
Well, he actually, and something like that happened. I'll go ahead and tell you something. A very similar incident happened later. Now, this happened, the conference was in August. It was like early, maybe middle August. And I went to the church on Labor Day weekend. This was not long after the conference when I went to the church and had that experience of God's love. Now we're into October. I've been going to the church. I've gotten the compulsion about astrology, but I'm still practicing it. I didn't give it up till Thanksgiving. So this is about a good month before Thanksgiving. And we're having our twice annual Astrology Awareness Day at the Astrological Society, which I helped coordinate. I was in charge of this. I think me and another person were in charge of it. And we would invite the public to come. We publicized it in the media. We said, come and learn about astrology. There'll be free, mini readings and free lectures on astrology. So I was giving one of the lectures, and I had a group of people listening to me. And I was standing up at a board, and I was explaining the astrological signs and their real significance. And all of a sudden, while I'm talking, I felt like saying, everybody should just go home now. It was like these words were trying to come out of my mouth. that would say, let's just go home now. We just need to go home. And, there was part of me was like, Marcia, just put the chalk down, because I had chalk. Just put the chalk down and tell everybody to go home. And I'm thinking, I can't do that. I can't do that. People will think I'm crazy. And I actually had to struggle for a few minutes against this. It was so strong that I almost said it, but I kept myself from saying it. My will was still strong enough to like cut it off. But it was so powerful that, it kind of shook me up. It shook me up for several minutes. So that happened a few months after. That was in October. That was probably about, 2 months after the thing at the conference. So yeah, I look back on that. I see, the Holy Spirit was working on me.
Well, as you're relating that, both in Romans 10:8, Deuteronomy 30:14, Romans 10:8, the word is near you, even in your mouth and in your heart. And then in Deuteronomy 30:14, the word is very near you, in your mouth. There it was.
The Holy Spirit was trying to, convict me. I think convict me. And, of course, it gave me the feeling, the impression, I already had the impression God didn't like astrology. And so this was like a confirmation of it, like, yes, God really doesn't like astrology. He wants you to put the chalk down and go home, and not just you go home, but you tell all the people sitting here listening to you to go home. It's like, it was just confirmation of that to me, and which was kind of scary because I didn't want to give astrology up. So see,
Yes.
It was a quandary for me. At that point, it was a quandary. And but I look back on those things and it's really kind of amazing.
Yes.
What God was doing. So God, I think one of the upshots of this that people should realize is that God can reach anybody, and he can use all kinds of means and methods and people and situations to reach them. So it also, I think another thing from this is that prayer is important. If God, burdens you to pray for somebody, pray for them, and no matter what it looks like, even if it looks like nothing's going on with a person, you don't know what God's doing behind the scenes. So I think it's an encouragement for Christians to pray for lost people that they feel they can't witness to, people that won't go to church, people that seem hostile. You pray for them. If you feel burdened for them, you pray for them anyway.
And I do want to say something, that gentleman who prayed for you, God really directed him not to witness.
Yes.
And just,
yes,
because there's a
just
time
pray.
in fact, there's an instance in the New Testament. Peter said, you can convert your husband without a word. There's situations God will just say, look, I got this, but you have your responsibility to be burdened in prayer. So there are many times I feel like, okay, this isn't the time to say something, it'll happen.
Yes, right. You have to ask God for wisdom for when to speak and when not to speak, because there are times when you should speak and times when you shouldn't speak.
Right.
And you just need wisdom from the Holy Spirit as to when to do that. Yeah. So this young man was following that. He was following that wisdom.
So I'm going to share screen here.
Okay.
As your book, it's SpellBound. And
Right.
I'll save your voice a little bit. I'm just going to read it for our readers.
Okay.
Our culture is saturated with the supernatural. TV shows such as Medium, Charmed, and Lost all have an otherworldly theme. Most of them blurred the lines between good and evil. The past year was a record year for Hollywood in the production of films that dealt with the supernatural, paranormal. While we choose our entertainment, our kids don't often have the luxury of choosing whether to be exposed to these things at school. This book seeks to present a lucid, comprehensive examination of the paranormal and occult by breaking down the principles of paranormal practices, giving key points about the practices so that parents can readily identify them. This book discusses the occult view of supernatural energy and of good and evil, and how these concepts are seen in popular literature and movie. The book also explains the dangers and gives a biblical basis for concern. Christian parents need to be equipped to discuss these matters with their children. SpellBound.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, let me just say about that was written by the publishers, not me, but I agree with it. And I noticed the price has gone down. You actually can get some, it's still expensive, but lately I've had people ask me about it. They wanted to buy a hard copy and it's been like, $89 or $104. And I've noticed now that there's a $39 price and then used goes down even more. I think there was like a $15 or something. So actually, this is a good time to get it because those prices go up and down if you want the hard copy. And then on Kindle, it's cheaper, $9.99. So that is an older book because you could see the references to Charmed and Lost, which I don't think are on TV anymore, but or Medium. But the principles that I go through there about the occult are still relevant. And I may be updating this book and having it republished, but I haven't started on that yet. So, and
well, I just wanted to say for people without Kindles, you can download a Kindle if you have a PC.
yes.
Now, for
Yeah,
me
you don't have to
personally,
have a Kindle. Yeah, you can just
yeah,
download it on your
yeah, in
computer.
the old, yeah,
Free.
yeah,
Free.
yes, which is great.
Yeah.
I don't use the Kindle reader. I bought one for my mom. I bought several for her because they wore out. I'm sorry, there's this bug keep bothering me. And you also have this other book, which I'll just show a little
Yes.
bit of. And I will link to your website so that the viewers can also have access. There's lots of
Okay.
resources.
Okay.
I'm just going to read this because I know nothing about it. The Enneagram
Oh,
of personality has been embraced by a growing number of evangelicals, first
oh yeah, that's
introduced
a good
into the
statement.
church by disciples of the Roman Catholic priest, mystic, and contemplative father Richard Rohr. It has come to be regarded as a spiritual tool, but is it a spiritual tool which brings about better understanding of oneself and the God of Scripture? That is the question this book aims to answer. Many of us attend church to learn about God, to learn about ourselves, and to connect with God and others. Along with that is a general belief that the church is spiritually safe. After all, the best source of knowledge about God comes from his self-revelation, which is contained in his inspired, inerrant word, the Bible. We rely on church leaders to interpret the Bible, to carefully teach and guide the church family while keeping false teaching on the other side of the doors. But like a virus on a physical level, false teaching can operate on a spiritual level. A church leader may be introduced to new concept or spiritual tool by what is believed to be a reliable source. It may be embraced as a path to a better understanding of God and self. Even with the best intentions and efforts of spiritual leaders, they become spiritually infected and pass their infection to the flock. In Richard Rohr and the Enneagram Secret, we explore the spiritual infection of those who have embraced Richard Rohr and the Enneagram. He is delivered into the church through his disciples. The claims for the Enneagram are simple. Supposedly, it's an ancient tool used by some of the early church fathers. It is claimed to be the face of God, and each Enneagram number is an individual spiritual path to deeper spiritual understanding and fuller self-awareness. But what if this seemingly harmless tool is in fact one of the largest deceptions perpetrated upon the Christian church in recent history? I've not had any exposure to this, but was all
That's good. It's huge in the church. It's huge in the church. And it's even taking over some churches. I mean, it's even in big ministries, like campus ministries, other Christian organizations. Christian employers will ask people who are applying for jobs to take an Enneagram test, and it's completely invalid. It has no validity, but it comes out of the New Age. And I've done several. If people are interested, I have 9 articles on my website, plus that book. I've done a lot of posts on Facebook if people are on Facebook, but probably getting the book or reading the articles is easier. And there's lots of podcasts and interviews out there I've done on the Enneagram, quite a few. It's easy if you just Google it or Google me and Enneagram on YouTube. And there's a 9-minute video where I give the history of the Enneagram. So it's invalid. It's from the New Age. There's no reason to do it. And it's actually in the church, it's causing damage. But that's another topic for another day.
Certainly. Well, I just wanted to add, I promised that I would do what I could to advertise your work and your books and your website.
Thank you. Yes, no, I appreciate it. Thank you,
So
Sal. Thank you so much.
I want to thank you for granting this interview. If I may say a prayer for you.
Oh, yeah, please. Thank you.
Heavenly Father, we thank you that you've taken us from darkness into light.
Yes,
Lord, it's definitely hard for me to talk about my past in this area, but it is good to give honor and glory to you for what you've done, that you've given us eyes to see, and you've taken us from a dark place and brought us into the glorious light of Jesus Christ, our Lord Jesus Christ. I pray for Marcia's ministry and for her health.
Thank you, Lord.
And Lord, prosper her in every way, physically, spiritually, financially, etc. And thank you for the ministry you've given her, and grant her more years on this earth if you do tarry. And so, Lord, also bless the listeners who have heard this interview. And thank you again, Lord, for all your goodness and the law of grace. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you,
right.
Sal.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Okay.
You.
So you'll let me know when you ever have this up. Will it be something I could see or share?
Yes, I'll link it to you. Yes.
Okay.
It'll
All right.
Pretty much whatever there'll be that very minimal edit, when we just
okay.
You had to attend to your package outside, but that's
okay.
it. This is great. Take care.
Okay. Thank you. You too, Sal.
All right. God
Bye-bye.
bless. Bye-bye.
God bless you.